Hey, everybody. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. How you doing? How you doing, folks? How are you doing? Welcome, everybody. So sorry for the delayed start. Um, but I'm here. I'm here, and we're going to talk. We're going to have our live tonight. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So glad to be here with all of you. Should be a good stream tonight. So let's get going. Let's get going.
Spoken of the American century. I say that the century on which we are entering can be and must be the century of the common man.
A radical redistribution of economic power.
I mean, we know that racism is just a byproduct of capitalism. Everything would be all right if everything was put back in the hands of the people.
We need a government that will make sure Americans are taken care of and organize the economy to serve the people, not the profits of a wealthy few.
We now have the techniques and the resources to get rid of poverty.
We got to start getting out there with the people.
Get out of the movement and get to the masses.
We need a government of action.
So glad to be here with all of you tonight. Welcome, welcome, welcome. So you want to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell so that you can be aware of every time we do one of these. It's a late Sunday evening. I'm here chatting with all of you. So I guess, the way we do things here, for those of you who may not be aware, the way we do things is I give my opening remarks, and my opening remarks are then followed by a roll call in which I call you all out as I see you, names and locations. And after that, I then answer your super chat questions for the rest of the night. That's how we do things here. Now, tonight, as I do my opening remarks, just like every other night, it would be awesome if folks could send me some super chats, and I will take those super chats and I will write them down. I'll be writing them down as we go along. And then in the second half of the show, I will answer your super chat questions. That's how we will do things. It's going to be good. So there we go. That is how it's going to work. So yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Hit the notifications bell. If you want to post this on your Facebook, that would be awesome. If you want to post this on your Instagram, that would be awesome. If you want to post this on your Twitter, you want to drop this in a Facebook group. If you want to post this on Truth Social, that would be great. The more people that find out about these streams, the better. The more that our great community on here will grow. The more people will find out about the amazing work that we're doing here. The more people that would be part of what we do. So welcome, everybody. So glad to have you here with us. It's really going to be an interesting night. Now, I guess we'll start out with some business. I call it business, but it's just kind of an update on everything going on in the CPI universe. First things first, shout out to Lily Goldklang, Comrade Lily Goldklang. Lily Goldklang is in Nicaragua. She is in Nicaragua for a celebration of the anniversary of the revolution. Representing the Center for Political Innovation. It's going to be pretty great. So glad that she's there. Write down the super chat. All righty. Very, very good. And so Lily Goldklang is there. That's pretty cool. And we wish her the best. We wish her safe travels. I understand she is safely arrived in Nicaragua. She'll be there for the next several days. Then she'll be back here in New York. And then a few days after that, I will be headed back to Chicago, where we will be preparing and engaging in the final preparations for our tremendous upcoming conference, which I think if I can find the image of it, I will put it up here on the screen. Let me just pull up the image, see if I can find it here. I just want to pull it up on the screen. Here we go. All right. So the conference that we're having in Chicago, I'll just put it up here on the screen. I've got some exciting updates and news about that conference. So let me just pull it up here on the screen. All right. So this is the conference that's happening in Chicago. It's in the Chicago area. It'll be at the Deerfield Plaza Hotel. It'll be happening on the 6th of August is when it will be taking place. The 6th of August, and it'll be at the Deerfield Plaza Hotel. That's about 20 minutes out of Chicago. It's not actually in Chicago. It's in like a suburb of Chicago. That's where we decided to ultimately do the conference. And it's gonna be doors open at 1 p.m. So if you want to be there, get there at 1 p.m. and come on in. And it's going to be great. Now, a lot of new developments have happened with the conference. So I am going to go over them bit by bit about what will be happening in Chicago on August 6th. So one big development is that we just figured out who one of our guest speakers will be. She's not a member of the Center for Political Innovation, but she will be our honored guest. We are honored to have her there. One of the people that will be speaking at our conference on August 6th will be none other than Tara Reade. Now, the folks know the name Tara Reade. Tara Reade is a woman who used to work for Joe Biden, and she was sexually assaulted by Joe Biden. And because Me Too was going on, she felt like it was appropriate for her to come forward with her allegations. She had told friends and families prior to that. And so she came forward with her allegation about what had happened. And the information pretty much lines up. Her friends and coworkers have confirmed what she said, and it lines up. And, Joe Biden sexually assaulted her when she worked for him. And we know that Joe Biden is not the only woman Joe Biden ever sexually assaulted. That we've seen the video of Joe Biden and his crimes that he's committed against women, the creepy, smelling of the little girls, etc. Joe Biden is a creep, and one of his victims is Tara Reade. And Tara Reade has refused to back down about that. She has stood firm. She's been adamant about that. So, she has faced a huge amount of intimidation because of the fact that she came forward about Joe Biden and his crimes. And all of a sudden, out of the blue, even though the mantra of the Democrats was believe women, they were all about Me Too. They suddenly, when it came to Tara Reade, they didn't believe her. And the fact that Tara Reade is an anti-imperialist and has spoken sympathetically about Russia and has spoken against the hysteria against Russia, against the Russophobia that has kind of consumed the United States, especially since 2014. Because of that, they considered that to be evidence that she wasn't telling the truth. Simply the fact that that Tara Reade, because of the fact that she has made statements sympathetic to Russia, they say, oh, she can't be telling the truth simply because of that. And Tara Reade really exposed how fake all this woke bullshit from the Democrats really is, because they were all about believe women. We're going to have a stand against sexual assault. Sexual assault will never be tolerated. And then all of a sudden, Joe Biden was the nominee. And all of that went right out the window. Suddenly, if Joe Biden was the Democratic nominee, it was over. The Me Too movement started when Donald Trump was picked as the presidential candidate of the Republicans, and escalated once he was in office. And then Me Too ended the minute Joe Biden was selected. And that really just shows how manufactured all of this is, and how the Democratic Party, they turn it on, they turn it off at their own convenience. And it's really horrifying. And there's no greater proof of that. No greater proof of the fact that we shouldn't just go along with mainstream media, that we shouldn't just assume that whatever the woke progressive left is doing is somehow revolutionary. There's no greater proof of that than Tara Reade. And we should all be in awe of Tara Reade because she has been threatened like you wouldn't believe. She has been, smeared. They've written so many articles about her that are just designed to destroy her reputation, designed to clear Joe Biden's name based on all kinds of weird personal innuendo. And isn't this, again, with sexual assault victims, this is what they always say. What they always say is not okay and is out of bounds, right? You're never supposed to say, did this person, you're not supposed to bring up unrelated things to malign their character. That's exactly what they did and continue to do to Tara Reade. And one of their main arguments is her anti-imperialist political views. The fact that she is a sympathizer with the people of Russia against U.S. imperialism. And so Tara Reade is going to come and speak at the Center for Political Innovation conference. And, it wasn't an easy decision for Tara. I've been in touch with Tara and she has a lot of fear. She is under a lot of threat. I mean, I don't want to, expose too much of her personal business, but they have gone after her with everything they've got. They have gone after her so viciously. They have tried to destroy her reputation. They have, you can read about it. I don't want to get into the details because, it's not my story to tell, but we are going to give a platform to Tara Reade at our conference. She will be speaking there. We will have her back. We are going to have lots of security there because we know that Joe Biden is viciously out to get her. We know that a lot of these Antifa woke liberals are after her. So we are going to have a lot of security at that conference because Tara Reade's going to be there. I'll tell you that much. We are honored that she trusts us enough to come to our conference, to allow us to give her a platform, to tell her story, to tell the truth about who Joe Biden really is, to expose the synthetic left, all the Democrats, all the people that were marching to stop Donald Trump. They were marching in support of the woman who sexually assaulted Tara Reade. And they were marching in support of the Democratic Party woke cult that says to believe women until that woman's name is Tara Reade, until the accused person is Joe Biden. We are just so honored to have Tara be speaking at our event. I am just beside myself with honor. I'm just in a state of self-reflection. I'm I'm kind of in disbelief that Tara Reade has agreed to come to our conference. I'm just really happy about it. That's an important bit of information. So, wow, if you can be there on August 6th to show support for Tara Reade, to call out the synthetic left, fake Democrats, who are the main faction among the imperialists, to hear, that is going to be great. That is going to be great. It is going to be awesome. It's going to be awesome. So, I think it's really important that you be there. It won't be live streamed. It will be video recorded. And afterwards, there will be a high quality video, multiple cameras, etc., that will be uploaded to the internet. So that's how that'll work. Now, as far as other things, we're also at that event going to have Garland Nixon. I don't know if you folks know who Garland Nixon is, but Garland Nixon is a great radio host from Sputnik Radio, an amazing guy, also an anti-imperialist. He said going to Venezuela was a life-changing experience for him, seeing what that country has been up against and seeing how they withstood the sanctions. And Garland Nixon has a long career in media. He used to work at Fox. He's has a show on Pacifica Radio. He is awesome. He is going to be there in person. He will be there. In addition to that, Dan Kovalik. Do folks know the great writer Dan Kovalik? The great writer Dan Kovalik will be there. Dan Kovalik is a lifelong anti-imperialist. He was a lawyer for the Steelworkers Union. He worked in solidarity with Nicaragua and with Cuba and with other countries against imperialism. And he's been writing. He's a law professor, and now he's a writer. And he wrote The Plot to Scapegoat Russia, The Plot to Attack Iran, The Plot to Attack Venezuela. He's written a series of very good anti-imperialist books exposing the maneuvering and the media manipulation and the lies against anti-imperialist and socialist countries. We are so honored that Dan Kovalik is going to be there. It is just an honor to have Dan Kovalik there. And on top of that, as if that wasn't enough, we're going to have the great Peter Coffin. I'm sure you all know Peter Coffin, his YouTube channel. Peter Coffin will be there. He's the comedian. He does great documentaries, very important documentaries, exposing the lie of overpopulation, exposing cancel culture. Just really, really great stuff. Peter Coffin is going to be there. So we have really an all-star panel lined up for August 6th in Chicago. It is going to be something really, really special. Our opening panel, we've got 4 big-name, important anti-imperialist voices. Tara Reid, Garland Nixon, Dan Kovalik, Peter Coffin. It's going to be awesome. Folks, if you are part of the Center for Political Innovation, the CPI, you really are in the right place, because I don't know of any other socialist group that would even consider having a political event like this. Now, that's not all you're going to hear when you come to the event. Dust James, the Marxist-Leninist trucker, who's got a YouTube channel, he is confirmed he is coming to town, and he will be there in person to give a rousing anti-imperialist speech. Justin Simons, the organizational director of the Center for Political Innovation, he's going to be there. Lily Goldklang is going to be there. We're going to have representatives from 3 allied political groups that are not the same as us. We don't endorse any political party, but we're going to have a representative of the People's Party is going to be there. A representative of the Party of Communists, PCUSA, is going to be there. And in addition to that, we're going to have a representative of the Alex Saab Committee, the Committee to Free Alex Saab, the U.S. Committee to Free Alex Saab. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you. Tom and I go way back, by the way. Tom is a great guy. Tom is awesome. And thank you, Tom, for the super chat. And you're invincible. So it is going to be an all-star panel, if there ever was one. I mean, if you can get to Chicago August 6th, be there. You don't want to miss it. It is going to be amazing. In addition to the various speakers that I just mentioned, we have also joining us a musician, and actually multiple musicians. I had one musician lined up, and then another musician said that they wanted to come. So we're going to have multiple musicians. There's also some local Chicago folks. There's a woman who's a violinist, who's a very skilled violinist, in Chicago. And so we have the one musician we got lined up. We got another musician lined up, and we have a violinist, a local violinist who's also, violins are musics. That is a form of music, right? So it's going to be great. It's really going to be great. This is going to be a super anti-imperialist rally. There's an old poster that I saw for back in 1934 when the Teamsters were on strike. The Teamsters organized a big rally to support the Teamsters. They got a lot of very prominent socialists and leftists to be there. And so they put up a poster. And I looked at the poster and I didn't quite know what they meant, because it's archaic language. But the poster said, "Monster meeting to support the Teamsters." And I thought, monster meeting? What is Frankenstein and Dracula and the Invisible Man going to be there? But apparently back in the 1930s, if something was going to be really big, something was going to be really spectacular, it was just going to be gigantic, titanic. You said it was going to be a monster event. It was going to be a monster. I don't know if you know that. That's like old-fashioned terminology. Monster. Well, we are going to be having our monster event in Chicago. It is going to be a monster meeting, if there ever was one, between all the great speakers who are coming into town, all the great musicians. I mean, this is going to be tremendous. So, you don't have to pre-register to come. When you'll register at the door when you arrive. We will be asking $20 from every attendee. They can do it, we'll have security you'll have to go through. It's going to be very highly secure, because now that Tara's there, we absolutely have to protect Tara. And, people harass me on the internet. People threaten me. We had people come to our event, with intent to harm me at the last event, but I'm nowhere near anywhere near as threat as Tara. I mean, Tara is under way bigger threat than me. All right, we got Carolyn Conway. All right. Thank you, Carolyn. Let me write it down. All right. Very good question, Carolyn. Writing it down, and I wrote it down. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. And it's going to be great. It's going to be really, really great. I'm kind of in shock about how great it's going to be, this event. I really am. I am, you'll notice that I'm a little bit, I'm in kind of a weird place right now. I'm not my usual self. It's late at night. I had a long workout this afternoon. And I'm just kind of trying to process the fact that we're having such an amazing event. And I got a lot of things to take care of. Big, amazing events like this have a lot of nitty gritty. So if you're a CPI member, I hope that you will consider coming to town a couple days ahead of time to help us, coordinate our activities, help us make sure we have everything in order, that we dot the I and cross the T's, because we are going to need a lot of help. I'll just be honest with you. We're going to need help. I mean, financially, if you want to contribute to help the meeting happen, by all means, just shoot money to CPI events on Cash App. We're dropping it in the chat. You can just send us money via Cash App. It'll go straight to helping the event. That's one way to help us out. CPI events on Cash App, CPI events, that's one way to help us out. And if you are a CPI member, please consider coming a couple days early. Please consider coming up early. Where I live, there's a lot of Finnish people, a lot of people of Finnish heritage. People justify it. All right. Okay. All right. Finland, USSR, Winter War. Very, very good. All right. So, yeah, that's kind of the situation. That's the situation with Chicago. And I just wanted everyone to be aware of that. I'm still trying to process it and figure it all out myself. But that is the situation. That is the situation. So there you go. There you go. There you go. I mean, other things that are on my mind. I mean, we can talk about Joe Biden begging the Saudis to pump the oil. He really wants more Saudi oil, even though Saudi Arabia is bombing Yemen. But he's supposedly outraged. We can't have Russian oil because Russia is invading Ukraine. The situation in Ukraine, the U.S. won't let Ukraine negotiate a peace. The United States wants to keep this war going as long as they possibly can. We've noticed that in Russia, nostalgia for the Soviet Union is rising. The Communist Party is rising in popularity. The war is forcing many people in Russia to recall the greatness of socialism and to express pride in the history of the Soviet Union. And so, well, thank you very much, David Fox. Much appreciated. Much appreciated. Thank you. We're seeing a rise of, there's been a lot of Soviet nostalgia. One thing that you'll never hear about in U.S. media, they do a lot to cover it up, is the fact that in every former country of the Soviet Union, every former Soviet country, everyone, for the most part, there is polls taken. There are polls taken that say, people say life was better under the Soviet Union, right? In Romania, they say that. In Czechoslovakia, they say that. In Hungary, they say that. And consistently, it's a majority say life was better before the fall of socialism. And in Russia, there's a lot of nostalgia for the Soviet Union. There's a lot of admiration for Joseph Stalin, actually, in Russia. And that there is a high amount of nostalgia. People say life was better under socialism than it is now since the restoration of capitalism. And many people look into the details, and it makes perfect sense that people would feel that way. It makes perfect sense people would feel that way. Why? Well, because of the fact that when free market capitalism was restored in Russia during the 1990s, it was an economic disaster. You had the country being auctioned off to the highest bidder. And you had a huge rise in crime, a huge rise in poverty, a huge rise in sex trafficking and drug addiction. You during that time, if you went to any of the subways in a major city in Russia, there'd be older folks trying to sell you their clothes or sell you yesterday's newspaper so they could have some money to eat with. All kinds of people lost their life savings. People worked their whole life, and then they had nothing. They had nothing, no pension, nothing. There were people, starving on the streets. I mean, the fall of the Soviet Union was an economic catastrophe. And it's so ironic because we're constantly told that communism failed. Communism never got anything done. Well, no, communism is what made Russia a modern country. Communism electrified Russia. It wiped out illiteracy. It built the modern university system. It built the trains. It built the steel mills. It was socialist economic planning and the 5-year plans of Stalin that created modern Russia and made it an industrial superpower that then defeated the Nazis, that then invented space travel. And the restoration of capitalism in the 1990s created an economic disaster. You can read Naomi Klein's great book, The Shock Doctrine. You can read Philip Thayer and his book, Europe Since 1989. There's many books about it. It is a well-documented fact that neoliberalism in Russia had catastrophic results, the implementation of free market policies. So would Russia's economy grow faster if socialism was restored? I don't know. Interesting. Poll. Enver Hoxha seen in a positive light by many Albanians. Well, there you go. Not surprising, Gleb. That matches what I said. That matches what I said exactly. Right? Because what has life in Albania been like since 1993, since the overthrow of socialism? Life in Albania has gotten consistently worse. Life has gotten worse. Living standards have decreased. Education has gone down in quality. Unemployment has risen. There's been sectarian religious violence. I know now the USA, one of their counter gangs that they're using to fight Iran, the Mujahideen Khalq, MEK, has actually set up shop in Albania. So life in Albania has gotten consistently worse since Enver Hoxha and socialism was removed. Enver Hoxha died, and then a couple of years after that, the Party of Labor of Albania was removed from power, and neoliberal economics came in, and it was a nightmare. I've talked with Albanians about what those years following the overthrow of socialism in Albania were like, and it was certainly a disaster. So this poll makes perfect sense, and thank you, Antonio. Thank you, Antonio, for the super chat. Much appreciated. Makes perfect sense that people would have this level of nostalgia, right, in the former socialist countries, and you would never hear anything about it. But there is a huge amount of nostalgia. And now, amid this war, where you have the United States, forcing Russia into a military confrontation against their wishes, right on their border, right? The USA in 2014 overthrew the democratically elected leader of Ukraine. They toppled Viktor Yanukovych, and they installed a fanatically anti-Russian government that was not voted into office. It came into power through violence and chaos in the streets and a coup. And that government, that hugely anti-Russian government, that government that was extremely hostile to Russia, that had a whole historical narrative that blames Russia for all the problems of the country, that government was rejected by the people of the eastern regions, the people of Crimea. They voted to separate, because Crimea is a very small place. I've actually been there. And Crimea, it's a very small peninsula, and there's a huge Russian military base there. And almost everyone in Crimea, they work at a business that does business with the Russian military base. They're somehow tied in. So there was an understanding that this Russian military base in Crimea might be forced out by this new government. So the people of Crimea, they took a referendum and they voted overwhelmingly to join with Russia. And then the people in Donetsk and Lugansk, they voted to be independent. They established independent governments, the Donetsk People's Republic and the Lugansk People's Republic, and they voted to separate from Ukraine. And at that point, Russia, even though they voted for it, Russia was so committed to not having a confrontation, they did not want a war, that Russia did not recognize them, right? In 2014, when Donetsk and Lugansk declared independence from Ukraine, Russia didn't recognize them. No one talks about this, right? You make it sound like, Putin immediately just rolled in the tanks or something. No. In 2014, Russia didn't recognize them. Instead, Russia facilitated the Minsk Accords, the Minsk Agreements, and had a process where the Ukrainian government signed a treaty agreeing to reintegrate the people of Donetsk and Lugansk back into the Ukrainian society. They wanted to be independent, the people of these regions. They wanted to be independent. Russia said, don't do that. Don't do that. That's going to provoke a war with NATO. It's going to provoke a war with the West. We don't want that. So instead, let's have a peace process through which you can be reintegrated back into Ukrainian society. They never talk about this in mainstream media. They'll talk about the Ukraine situation. They never even mention the Minsk agreements, that Russia facilitated an agreement to bring Donetsk and Lugansk back into Ukraine, that Russia facilitated negotiations to bring them back in. And those agreements were signed by the Ukrainian government, and the Ukrainian government didn't carry out those agreements. They didn't honor them. They didn't carry them out. And they continued punishing people in Donetsk and Lugansk for speaking their own language. They continued tearing down World War II memorials. They continued to carry out economic austerity. I mean, the price of heating gas went up. I mean, the pension of elderly folks was cut. The government in Kiev made a point of saying, we don't recognize the people of these eastern regions. We don't recognize them as people. We don't recognize them as people. We don't recognize them as having basic rights as human beings. They were committed to this, and they were adamant. And not only did they not recognize them as people, not only did they drag them to court for speaking their own language. Again, could you imagine if there was some right-wing racist governor in Texas or Arizona or California who said, all right, if I see any of them Mexicans speaking Spanish, I'm going to drag them to court. They're going to have to pay a fine for speaking that because we speak English here in America. We would never tolerate that, would we? That would be racism, and we would never tolerate that. Here in the United States, English is the language that is predominantly used, but we don't stop people of Latin heritage from speaking Spanish. We don't stop people of Chinese heritage from speaking Chinese. We don't stop people of French or French Canadian heritage from speaking French. We don't stop indigenous people from speaking their language, right? We used to, and that was called genocide. And the whole world recognizes what went on in the Indian schools, right? That we used to have, the boarding schools where we beat the language out of Native American children. We recognize that was wrong. So if there was some racist governor who decided to start dragging Spanish-speaking people in America to court, especially in historically Spanish-speaking parts of this country, right? The old Southwest that used to be part of Mexico. It was stolen during the Mexican-American War. If we did that, everyone would say that's racism. You can't do that, right? I mean, these people that, a lot of them, they didn't cross the border crossed them during the Mexican-American War. They've lived there for generations. That's their language. That's their culture. If they want to speak Spanish, that's their business, right? And we would not do anything. We would not tolerate that if that was going on. However, that's what the government of Ukraine has been doing. They have been dragging Russian-speaking people to court and fining them, forcing them to pay fines for speaking their own language. And then, on top of that, they've been shelling them. There's been a military confrontation going on against the governments that these people established. The Donetsk People's Republic has been involved in a military campaign because the government in Kiev has been carrying out drone strikes against them, bombing them, shelling them. There's been a food blockade to make sure these people in the eastern regions, that they can't speak their own language, that they can't get food, a food blockade to prevent them from getting food. The death count is at least 14,000 people. Right. And we're hearing all about these Ukrainian civilians, and I feel for Ukrainian civilians, right? That they're dying, and I don't want to trivialize their death. It's awful what's happening there. But what about all the people in the eastern regions that have been dying for the past 7 years while there was a Minsk agreement that was supposed to end the war? Where's the empathy for them? They just don't matter, right? They're not on CNN, so their lives don't matter. That's basically what we've been told, right? I actually want to show you all because it really needs to be shown. I'm going to pull it up here, right? I'm going to pull it up here because it gets completely not recognized by mainstream U.S. media. And it's infuriating to me. It's infuriating to me that, that this doesn't get acknowledged, because it's like, if people could see this, they would know. If people could see the image I'm trying to pull up for you on the screen here, forgive me for looking away from the camera. I'm just trying to get this image on the screen because it needs to be seen. If people could see this image, right? if people could see this image, right? People could see, the image that I'm about to show you. They would have a completely different understanding of the war and the conflict going on in Ukraine right now. And I'm going to pull up this image because I want people to see it, because again, like I said, if people could actually see this image, they might understand what's going on in a very different way. Right? So we are told that evil Russia is out of the blue just attacking Ukraine because Putin was having a bad day and said, I want to kill me some Ukrainians. That's what I want to do. I don't like those Ukrainians and their songs of peace and freedom, so I'm going to crush their freedom. That's not what's happening, right? I am going to show you an image right now that if our media was honest and if our media was really trying to explain to us why this war is happening, this image would have been on our screens constantly, because this is why this war is happening. I'm pulling it up right now. I am pulling up the image right now. This image, this is why the war in Ukraine is happening. This is called the Alley of Angels. You can Google it. The Alley of Angels. The Alley of Angels. And this is a monument to all the children who have been killed by the US-backed regime in Kiev. The Alley of Angels. Google it. I didn't make this up. It's not propaganda. Oh, that's Putin propaganda. Those are fake children. Those are actors. No. This is real children who got murdered simply because they live in Russian-speaking territory. They're from the regions of Ukraine, the Lugansk and the Donetsk regions that make up Donbass, right? They're from the Russian-speaking territories of eastern Ukraine. And they're in a region that votes for the Communist Party, and they are in a region that votes for the Party of Regions. They're in an area where the people still are very proud of the Soviet Union, where they think that the fall of the Soviet Union was a bad thing, and they're very proud of their heritage. And because they live there, they did nothing. These are children, right? These are not combatants, right? These are not fighters. These are not terrorists, right? Israel always tries to tell you that the Palestinian children they kill are terrorists. These are not terrorists, right? These are children who the U.S.-backed regime in Kiev murdered. It murdered them. It murders them, and it's been shelling them. They've been hiding in their basements for 7 or 8 years. We hear about people in Ukraine are now hiding in their basements. Well, that's bad. I'm not in favor of that. I don't want people to be suffering. But these people have been hiding in their basements for 8 years straight. They've been hiding in their basements. They have been living under terror, and Russia held off recognition from these folks and said, just implement the Minsk Accords. Just implement the Minsk Accords. Just implement the Minsk Agreement. Just implement the Minsk Accords. Just implement the Minsk Accords. Please, just implement the agreement. Let these people have human rights. We don't want them to break away from Ukraine. We don't want to have a big war with NATO. We just want you to treat these people. Stop killing them. That was what Russia's message. I cover the UN, folks. I'm a reporter. I listen to the UN meetings. And that is what Sergei Lavrov, and that's what Vitaly, that's what the Russian ambassador and, others have been saying. They speak at the UN and they say, just recognize these people as human beings. That's what Dmitry Peskov and others, they just say, just recognize these people as human beings. Just recognize these people as human beings, right? Any American who sees the Alleys of Angels and still supports Ukraine unconditionally should feel ashamed of themselves and seriously brush up on their critical thinking skills. Exactly, Tyler. Exactly. I mean, can you imagine these people? It's not like this went on for a week. Not like this went on for 2 weeks. Not went on for 3 weeks. This happened for 8 years straight. These people have been living under bombing and shelling. Children have been dying. And Russia waited. And they waited. And they waited. And Russia waited. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited some more. And they waited some more. And they waited. And they waited. And they waited. And these children kept dying. And there was a food blockade. And they weren't getting food. And they weren't getting medicine. And millions of them fled into Russia. Russia took in millions of refugees. Literally millions of these people fled from their homes and moved to Russia to get the hell away from the conflict. All right. And They fled into Russia. And now, back at the beginning of this year, it became clear that there was going to be some kind of escalation, that the Kiev government was just going to roll in. They were going to roll in on Donetsk and Lugansk. They were going to roll in and just crush these people. They were going to have a full-on offensive. And it became very clear there were some explosions. There were some bombings that went on. And Russia picked up on the fact that these people, that Joe Biden basically gave the go-ahead to the Kiev regime to just roll in on these people and crush the Donetsk People's Republic and crush Lugansk. And they were getting ready to just slaughter these people. These children were already dead, but they were gonna wipe out all these people. Basically, they were gonna roll in and just raise the whole Donbass region. But they didn't, because Putin stopped it. And that's what this war is about. This is denazification. Russia is moving in to protect the communities and the people in the eastern regions who have been under attack and dying. 14,000 people killed. 14,000 people killed. And Russia said, not anymore. Russia is trying to bring an end to an 8-year conflict. This war in Ukraine didn't start earlier this year. It started 8 years ago when the USA overthrew the elected government of Ukraine, overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, installed a fanatically anti-Russian region that then declared war on its own people in the East. And now it's gotten to the point that Russia has come to the conclusion, look, Ukraine is not going to let the people of the Donbass reintegrate into their society. And so as a result of that, Russia has recognized the Donetsk People's Republic, recognized the People's Republic of Lugansk. They shot off fireworks, and they celebrated that recognition. And now Russia is there in a war that is going on to defend these people. That is what's taking place. And there you go. I'm not going to be on YouTube for long, Dan. You know that. Right? Eventually, I'm going to be on Rockfin. Eventually, they're going to take me down. I'm on here as long as I possibly can. I'm telling the truth as long as I possibly can. But, we never know what will happen. And now is the time, folks, to sign up on Rockfin. You got to sign up on Rockfin. You got to sign up on Truth Social. You got to sign up on Odyssey. All these streams go up on Odyssey. I have an account on Rumble. I've never streamed on Rumble, but I think I might start streaming on Rumble now. But I'm going to keep going, right? If they shut me down and ban me, that's fine. I mean, it's not fine. It's a horrible act of censorship, but I ain't going to stop. That's the important thing. I ain't going to stop. I am going to keep going. I am going to keep going because there is a world of lies around us, and we got to tell the truth. And so, now is the time to go right now and follow me on Odyssey. Go right now and follow me on Truth Social. Go right now and follow me on Rumble. I got a very small channel on Rumble. I just posted like the Saxton lectures. I don't think there's anything up there on Rumble, but I might be streaming on there pretty soon. But, right now, I'm telling you, go and follow me on Odyssey, because they're coming for me. Today, I got mysteriously locked out of my Twitter account. And it wouldn't let me log in. Every time it said I had to change my password in order to get back in. So I changed my password, and then it said, doesn't recognize this account. And I was like, what? And then it says, doesn't recognize this account. And I'm like, what? And it's like, doesn't recognize this account. 3 or 4 times, it just kept saying, doesn't recognize this account. Finally, it let me change my password, and it let me back into my Twitter account. I don't know what was going on there, but they've admitted that they have this strategy where instead of just straight up banning people, they do things where they just lock people out of their accounts. Like, my friend Donald Corder, the great reporter, he's based in Russia, Donald Corder. You've seen his stuff. He has the Revolution Report. Good, longtime friend of mine. I've known him since he was in college. I've known him since he had a Marxist club at his college, at Rutgers. And, he and I go way back. And they banned him from Facebook. And the way they banned him is they didn't tell him he was not welcome on Facebook, right? What they did is that they kept making him verify his account, and he lives in Russia, and they kept forcing him to verify his account. And then one day they took his phone number out of the account. So it was like, in order to verify his account, he needed to, he needed to, connect it to his phone number. They removed his phone number. So it was basically a way of getting him off of Facebook. They banned him from Facebook, basically. It's a soft ban where you lock people out of their accounts. You make them just change their password over and over again, and eventually people just go away, right? And they admit that they're doing things like that. That's what they did to Donald Quarter. And they may do something similar to me pretty soon. They may do it. And that's why you guys have to assume you may not be able to find me here on YouTube forever. I may not be here forever. And who the hell knows? I mean, you never know when it could be. So please, by all means, join the Center for Political Innovation. That's a great step. If you join our organization. It's only $10 a month, which is not hugely expensive. It's very easy to join the CPI. And if you join the CPI, you'll get invited to our Zoom calls every Saturday, and you'll be plugged into what we're doing. Follow me on other social media. Get connected with me in other ways, because we cannot count on me being here forever. Will you be reporting your old videos to Rumble? You mean uploading? That's interesting. Odyssey has uploaded all of my accounts, because all I have to do is I have to push this button and it links them. Rumble is a little bit different. Rumble, you have to actually upload every individual video, which I might do. I don't think I'm going to upload every stream, but I'll probably upload some of the more important videos, the Jordan Peterson debunks, the debates, those kind of things. I'll probably upload to Rumble. Yeah, I'll probably do that. I know Rumble, the way they work is they have different categories of videos. If it's on another channel on Rumble, you can't get any revenue for it if it's on another platform. So that might be interesting. But we'll see. We'll see what they do, right? We'll see how long we can stay here. Look, I am going to stay on this platform as long as I possibly can. If they ban me, I've got my videos backed up on Odyssey. If they demonetize me, we'll keep streaming on here. But in order to send me a super chat, you'll have to get on another app, because I won't be able to take super chats from YouTube. And that's how these things will work. So I am just going to keep going, right? I am not going to surrender, because I am in this game for real. When I was on the ship from Iran to Yemen, trying to deliver medical aid to Yemen. That was in 2015. I don't know. I've talked about this before. I talk about it a lot. It was a very pivotal moment in my life. But, I was in the Islamic Republic of Iran for the first time in 2014, and that was a life-changing experience. I mean, I had some amazing conversations with the Iranians, and it made me think a lot about who I was. Then I went back to Iran in May of 2015, and I got on a ship, a medical ship, with Iranian volunteers trying to bring medical aid to Yemen. And, of course, the Saudis and the Israelis don't want Iran to deliver medicine to the people of Yemen who are being bombed and attacked. So I was on this ship, and Israel and Saudi Arabia claimed that our ship was delivering weapons, that we were smuggling weapons to Saudi Arabia. And of course we weren't. But when we heard that was the smear that they were putting out on that, they were lying. They were claiming that this ship, run by a UN-recognized humanitarian organization called the Red Crescent Society, the Islamic version of the Red Cross, and they were saying that we were delivering weapons, we knew our lives were in danger at that point, right? Because then they could say that it was a military strike. Right? They could sink our ship, they could bomb our ship, and it would be a fair game. Oh, it's a weapons ship. Well, it wasn't a weapons ship. It was simply a medical ship. I was on that ship. It was not a weapons ship. It was full of flour. It was full of medicine. It was full of it had surgeons who were ready to go to Yemen and start, operating on people. It had, doctors. It had members of the Iranian parliament. It had anesthesiologists. They were there to start helping the people of Yemen with the flour and the rice and the medical supplies. And I was on that ship, and the day we were supposed to arrive, our ship was scheduled to arrive. We were overloaded. The ship was overloaded, so we didn't go as fast as we'd intended. But the day we were supposed to arrive at the port of Hodeidah, they bombed the port. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia bombed Hodeidah, the port of Hodeidah, where we were going to dock. They bombed that port 8 times in a single day. They bombed it 8 times in a single day. And they, in addition to that, they had a group of Sudanese mercenaries positioned around the port of Hodeidah, who were going to then unload on our ship with rocket launchers. And there was a group of mercenaries that had been positioned around the ship. So based on the fact that this group of mercenaries had been positioned around the ship with rocket launchers, based on the fact that the port was pretty much blown to shreds because they bombed it 8 times in a single day, we had to turn our ship around. We had to go to Djibouti. But as we were on our way to Yemen, and as I was on this ship headed for Yemen with these Iranian doctors and these Iranian, religious folks and members of parliament and all of that, and most of them did not speak English, and I certainly do not speak Farsi. I had a lot of conversations with them about who I am, about my religious faith, and about what it means to believe in God, and what it means to give your life to struggle. And it was really on that ship that I think that my faith in God was restored, which is fascinating, right? I mean, I had been raised as a Christian. I had been raised as a Christian, and then as I became a communist, I became an atheist because communists were atheists. It was just kind of assumed, and because I grew up around the religious right, the Christian right, and the Christian right, especially in those days, was very obnoxious. They were very, very obnoxious. They were supporting all the wars. They were supporting all the wars. They were supporting Bush and his attack on Iraq, and they were supporting free market capitalism, and they were just so awful in so many ways. And I didn't want to be part of the religious right. And I had grown up in more of a liberal Protestant, mainline Protestant faith tradition, but I was surrounded by the religious right. I didn't like them. I felt like the liberal Protestants I was around were not pushing back against the religious right enough. And so I thought, well, I'll be an atheist and I'll really push back against the religious right. And so I lost my faith based on that. I'll just briefly reflect on this before we get to the roll call, because it's interesting because, the religious right, it's interesting. They talk about the roots of the religious right or with what they called the Jesus freaks. The Jesus freaks, right, were these group of hippies. It was like a wing of the hippie movement that was embracing religion, right? That in the 1960s, you had those kids growing their hair long and smoking weed and whatever. There was a wing of the hippie movement that was very religious. And they called them Jesus freaks. And they were into, prayer with rock and roll music. There's like documentaries about them and such. So, the religious right started when Richard Nixon started using the aesthetics of the Jesus freaks for the Republican Party. What's his name? Billy Graham. Reverend Billy Graham had these TV specials where he would preach conservative Christianity. And Reverend Billy Graham, he was very much he was a Republican. He was a conservative. He was Richard Nixon's spiritual advisors. There's tapes of Billy Graham actually listening to Richard Nixon say all kinds of anti-Semitic things. He would call him up and say, "The Jews are out to get me. The Jews are out to get me, Billy. What am I going to do?" It was Billy Graham was this right-wing guy, but just from a marketing perspective, Reverend Billy Graham realized that it was good marketing to start, having Jesus freak aesthetics, right? Jesus freak aesthetics, hippie aesthetics on his broadcasts. And it's quite interesting because I think, one of the big songs that was popular with the Jesus freaks, there's a hymn that started out, it was written by a Catholic priest. It's called "They'll Know We Are Christians by Our Love." And I remember hearing that song when I was a kid. I really liked it, right? It's kind of about, they'll know we are Christians by our love. We are one in the spirit. It's good stuff. But if you look at how the religious right developed, right, it started that way, right? Ultras who say we produce too much food. All right. The religious right started that way. All right. But, really by the mid 80s, the religious right, it was so embedded with the Republican Party, and it was so anti-communist and so embedded in the U.S. military. They weren't even singing that song anymore. Most people that were part of the religious right didn't even know that song. That was a song that Catholics were singing. That was a song that the evangelical, or that the maybe liberal Protestants, like that's how I grew up, we would sing that song. But by the time the religious right became what it is, by that time, the religious right became what it is today. The song they were singing is a completely different song, which I also heard a lot growing up. Which, if you're somebody who grew up on the religious right, you probably heard endlessly. "Our God is an awesome God." I don't know if you ever heard that song. Not going to sing it for you, right? But it's It's a song that, I mean, maybe some people find it to be moving, but if you listen to the lyrics of that song, it is much more Nietzschean. It's much more, it's about God is so mighty and so strong and so powerful, and that's amazing. It's not about compassion. It's not about kindness. It's not about brotherhood. It's not about caring for other people. It is just about worshiping strength. God is so strong. God is so powerful. It's a pretty dark song. And the evangelical Christian right during the Bush years was just this abominable political group that, Bush invaded Iraq and they thought there was a crusade. They were having a war against Islam. They support Israel and all of Israel's crimes. And they believe in free market capitalism and privatizations and cutbacks. And, the evangelical Christian right were just the worst, most despicable bunch of people. And I mean, there were a lot of people caught up in it that were good people. But the ideology they were putting out was just something that was just so opposed to everything I believed in. I believe in compassion. I believe in kindness. I believe that, that those, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, etc. So the religious right really put me off. I was just not interested in that. And I was an atheist. But, as I got more involved in political work, I started to ask questions, right, about what does all of this mean? And I was starting, before I went to Iran, I was starting to reconsider, they talk about okay, Marxism is strict materialism, right? It's just, we all act in our economic interests. There's actually some letters between Marx and Engels where they dig into this. And Marx is like, hey, if our ideology says that it'll all just happen, why am I necessary? Why am I writing the Communist Manifesto? Why am I organizing the International Working Men's Association? Right? According to my ideology, this is all just going to kind of naturally happen. Everyone will just realize that it's in their material interests, and it'll happen. And that Marx realizes more or less that there is a role, there's a voluntary role in history, right? That while, yes, material conditions do define things, human beings can make moral and ethical choices, right? And that right and wrong do exist, and that there are also people like Frederick Engels. Frederick Engels was from a very, very wealthy family, very, very wealthy factory-owning family, who realize that capitalism is wrong and become revolutionaries, even though it's not in their material and class interest, right? And they realize that. So how does that happen? What about Che Guevara, right? Che Guevara was from a very wealthy family in South America and Argentina, but he became a full-time revolutionary, and ultimately gave his life on the battlefield in Bolivia. He fought in Cuba, and he fought in Bolivia, and he fought in the Congo for people that weren't his people, weren't his nation. He was just so committed to fighting for communism. And you can say the same about Fidel Castro, right? Fidel Castro, this Cuban guy who was from a wealthy family, went to college every day. He drove to college in his fancy, car, and was wealthy, but he gave it all in for the oppressed. What is that? Well, there's a moral and ethical question that there is a source that gives people strength to do things that are right, dare I say right, that are moral, that are against their own interests, right? And that everything is not simply material. Everything is not simply a matter of it just kind of naturally happens, historical inevitability, right? And we know why Marx really emphasized materialism. We know why. The reason Marx emphasized materialism was because of the fact that he was rebelling against feudalism, right? I mean, the 1848 German Revolution, that was a lot of people don't realize this, but the Communist Manifesto, it wasn't just written, it wasn't like Marx was just bored one night and he said, all right, I'm going to write the Communist Manifesto. There was a war going on. 1848 was a decisive year in European history. The year of 1848, there were over 200 different uprisings across Europe. 200. Can you imagine that? 200 different armed uprisings in Europe. It was the 1848 German Revolution that was defeated. There was uprisings in France. There was uprisings in Britain. There were uprisings in Belgium. There were uprisings in Hungary. There were uprisings in Poland. Everywhere in Europe, people were rising up, and they were rising up against feudalism. It was a revolt against the remnants of feudalism. The feudal system, where you have landlords and serfs, you have kings and queens and nobles and peasants, right? That system was on its way out. It had been defeated in England already, in Britain, the English Civil War. They defeated it, Oliver Cromwell. They had defeated it in France with the French Revolution. Napoleon had overturned quite a bit of it in his campaign across Europe. But the 1848 revolutions, the spring of nations, it was an uprising against feudalism. And so Karl Marx, in Feudalism, everything is framed in terms of religion, right? It's, you gotta obey the landlords because they have divine right to rule, right? And I mean, it's people get burned at the stake for thinking the wrong thing. But feudalism emphasizes everything in spiritual terms, right? The peasants are supposed to starve because it's for the good of the country. And if they're good moral people and they starve, why, then they go to heaven, right? And, that feudalism is everything is a spiritual question. They view everything in religious terms, and that justifies the hierarchical and oppressive order where the nobility lives off of everybody else, essentially. Well, as a result of that, Marx comes in and emphasizes materialism. And he emphasizes, no, it's not a spiritual question. There's material realities, right? Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. I think that's something that Friedrich Engels said. Thought is inseparable from matter that thinks. And that, when Marx comes in, he's rebelling against this feudal system that defines everything as a spiritual question, and those spiritual matters are not up for debate. You're not allowed to find your own path and none of that, right? Everyone must obey exactly what the feudal rulers are saying, and if you disagree with that, you can be burned at the stake, and the spiritual and religious points, all lead to obeying the leaders of feudal society. So Marx is rebelling against that, and he's going into the streets with the Germans and fighting with the Germans and with the Poles and with the Parisians and the French and others in this revolutionary upsurge across Europe, the 1848 Spring of Nations, a huge revolutionary upsurge. One thing that a lot of people don't get is that Karl Marx was an activist. Right. And this doesn't get emphasized enough. We think of Karl Marx as this guy who just sat around writing books. Well, he did that. And it's good that he did that. There's nothing wrong with writing books. We need people to write books. I write books, so go read my books. But there's nothing wrong with writing books. Buddha was the heir to a kingdom and walked away. Very good. Very good point, Funky, right? Very good point. And that that Marx wrote a lot of books, and we know him by his books, right? When he was in the streets of Germany in 1848 as part of the 1848 revolution, he didn't have a phone. He wasn't live streaming. Oh, here are me and Engels. We're about to go storm this castle. He wasn't doing that because there was nobody doing that. There was no phones back then. There might be photographs, but you had to stand still for like a long time for the photograph to work. And it was 1848, for Christ's sake. So we don't hear about Karl Marx, the activist. We hear about Karl Marx, the writer. But Karl Marx was an activist. He was absolutely an activist. When Karl Marx was in Germany, he was part of the 1848 German Revolution. And in addition to that, when Karl Marx was in Paris, you read the 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte, 1851, Karl Marx's pamphlet about the turmoil in French society. When you read that pamphlet, you know that Karl Marx wasn't sitting somewhere by himself. He was participating in that. In order to write that pamphlet the way he did and have all those intricate details about who was supporting the coup of Louis Bonaparte and who was opposing him and all that, you know that Karl Marx was among the crowds. He was in the streets. He was in the streets with the people and with the labor unionists, right? I haven't seen it. I recommend the Chinese anime. On Karl Marx, but I haven't seen the movie Young Marx. But he was in the streets of Paris, marching with the workers. He was organizing labor unions, right? I mean, the International Working Men's Association, it was an association of revolutionaries, but all of them were involved in actual organizing and building labor unions and associations. When Marx was living in London, in London, Karl Marx was the London correspondent for the New York Tribune, which was the newspaper that was like the radical newspaper of New York City. It was edited by Horace Greeley. Do folks know the name Horace Greeley? Horace Greeley was an amazing progressive in New York City. He was an abolitionist who was very opposed to slavery. He was an advocate of the right of women to vote. He was a socialist, and he had a newspaper called the New York Tribune. And his slogan was, "Go West, young man. Go West, young man." and Horace Greeley. And he hired Karl Marx from London to be his correspondent, to write news about what was taking place in London and analyze world events. Karl Marx wrote for the New York Tribune. That was the only job Karl Marx ever had. The only other job Karl Marx had was that he worked for a railroad. He was a railroad employee, and they fired him because his handwriting was too sloppy. Karl Marx had sloppy handwriting, so he couldn't work for the railroad anymore. He was keeping records for a railroad, and they fired him because his handwriting was too sloppy. And then he wrote for the New York Tribune. He wrote for the New York Tribune, and that was his job. And if you read what Marx wrote in the New York Tribune, he's writing excessively about Abraham Lincoln. He calls Abraham Lincoln the single-minded son of the working class. He calls the American Civil War the Second American Revolution. He's writing enthusiastically about the struggle to defeat slavery. But also, and we don't know, and this is the thing, again, there was no Facebook back then, there was no Twitter back then. And also back then it was a lot harder to be an organizer, right? You could be arrested and things like that. It was a lot more authoritarian political climate. But we know that Marx's group, the International Working Men's Association, they were leading strikes of textile workers. There were workers in Britain who wanted to support the black people of the American South. They wanted to support the black people in their struggle against slavery. They wanted to support Abraham Lincoln. So when they would bring a shipment of cotton from the U.S. South, and it was cotton that was picked by slaves, they would refuse to work with it in the textile mills. And they would shut down the mill. They would refuse to work with cotton that was picked by slaves, right? And somebody had to organize them to do that. London and Britain was on one side of the world, and the American South was on the other side of the world. Somebody had to organize them to do that. Someone had to tell them that you ought to stand in solidarity with the workers of the American South. Someone had to tell them to do that, right? Very good. Yeah, thank you very much. Someone had to tell them to do that. Someone had to organize them to do that. We know the International Working Men's Association was doing it, but you can bet that Karl Marx was involved in that. Karl Marx was probably in the factories handing leaflets to those textile workers and telling them about their own wages and their own conditions, as well as the conditions facing the slaves in the American South. Karl Marx was probably involved in day-to-day efforts to convince workers in London to stand in solidarity with the American slaves and with the struggle to defeat slavery in America. You can bet that Karl Marx was involved in that. He came up with slogans. He said, labor in white skin cannot be free, while labor in black skin is branded. That's Karl Marx, right? Another thing that Karl Marx did is he was heavily involved with solidarity with the Irish people, right? And protesting the execution of Irish revolutionaries and convincing the workers in Britain that it was in their interest to support the Irish freedom struggle. And building Irish solidarity committees. You can read about that. Amazing stuff. Karl Marx was an activist. He was an activist. Definitely was an activist. He was an organizer. Marxists were part of the Paris Commune of 1871. The Great Paris Commune that happened. So, Karl Marx was definitely a revolutionary organizer. He definitely was. But regardless, if you look at these letters from, Marx and Engels, it raises the question, what is the role of the individual in history? And actually, the father of Russian Marxism, Georgy Plekhanov, wrote this book called The Role of the Individual in History. And it's actually one of the favorite books of Hugo Chavez because it talks about what does it mean to be a hero, right? And who are the great individuals of history, and how there's one analysis that just blames it on great men. There are these great men, but actually what makes a great leader is one who gives expression to the sentiments among the broad masses, right? That a great leader in history is not, they don't create the situation all by themselves, but they are the expression of what the broad masses of people are bringing into motion. They give voice and expression to the broad sentiments of the masses. It's a great piece. If you can go read The Role of the Individual in History by Georgy Plekhanov. I think I'll pull it up here. I'll drop it in the chat. The Role of the Individual in History, right? But again, the role of the individual in history raises the question of, strict materialism would say there is no role for the individual in history. It all just kind of naturally happens. Well, it doesn't all just kind of naturally happen, right? It doesn't all just naturally happen. There is a role. There is a role for morality. There's a role for people finding inner strength. And all of that led me back to my religious beliefs. And it led me back to Christianity. And no, I didn't convert to Islam. I'm not a Muslim. I am a Christian. I am a Christian. The story of Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus Christ are so important to me. And I'm not going to preach at you all night long, because I know that there's a lot of people watching this that are atheists, and you're allowed to be an atheist. I'm not interested in forcing my religious beliefs onto you, but I'm trying to explain my background. And I guess what I am saying here is that that I'm in this for real, right? A Nazi told me racial unity is bad for workers. Okay, very good. I don't even know how to respond to that. But I'm here to tell you that I'm in this for real, and I'm not going to go away, and I'm going to keep going, and I'm excited about this conference coming up in Chicago. But I'm at this point that I feel this with all my heart and soul. I really do. And I have taken great risks, and I have made great sacrifices in my life. But I'm doing it. And I am not going anyplace, right? But I can't do it by myself, right? And that I know there are a lot of people watching this who have a hero inside of them. They have a part of them that longs to live for something bigger than themselves. They have a part of them that wants to give voice to the sentiments that are widespread among the broad masses of people. They have a part of them that wants to change the world, that wants to make great sacrifices for the cause of right. And so if that's you, and I think it's you, then I need you. I need your help. I need your help building this conference in Chicago. I need your help with the Center for Political Innovation. We need your help, right? And when people step up to the plate and help out, it's awesome. It's really, really awesome. Right now, I was so busy in Chicago, and I'm back, and I'm going to be so busy once again. I'm going to be so busy once again. But I do want to say that I am working on a new book, and I don't know how writing works for different people, right? We all write in our own ways. If you're a writer, I'm a writer. The way writing works for me is that you write an outline first. I generally write an outline. I make a plan for what I'm going to write. I do some research, but you can't really write it until you're ready, right? And if you're not ready, if you haven't done the right research, it doesn't work, right? If you're not ready to write it, all right, vulgar nationalism. If you're not ready to write, if you're not ready to write, it just doesn't work, right? I mean, if you don't know what you're doing, you don't have anything to say, right? You have to really understand a concept. You have to get kind of happy and excited about it, and then you can write it. So, I thought I would try to start writing this book that I'm writing, and it just is coming out of me. It's just coming right out of me. Boom. It's like this book is writing itself practically. And it's interesting. It's really interesting, that it's writing itself. But I know why it's writing itself, because all of these are concepts that I've looked into over the years. So basically, what I'm writing now, and, again, I'm going to get attacked for this. I'm going to get ridiculed for this. People are going to go, oh, my God, that's cringe. I don't fucking care at this point. Like, look, eventually the cancel culture cancels itself out. Have you noticed that? Because anything I do now, these people attack me for it, right? Everything I do is, what is it? It's like it's somehow Nazi, it's somehow anti-Semitic, it's somehow racist, it's somehow Trump supporting, it somehow proves I'm starting a cult and that I'm an evil, maniacal, psychopath, narcissist. You heard it all from Jason and Renee. No matter what I do, they're going to say the same shit. So, yeah, people are going to attack me for this. I don't fucking care. I don't fucking care. And if you don't like it, then you don't have to read it. But I am writing a self-help book. I am writing a self-help book for communists. That's what I'm writing. I am writing a self-help book for communists. A book about how to live your life in America in the 21st century as a communist. And that's what I'm writing, because I know so many young folks that are in the Center for Political Innovation who are struggling. They are struggling. Oh, thank you, Felonious. Thank you, Felonious Punk. They're struggling. Psychologically, they're struggling. They're struggling with their families. They're struggling to get by. And, it's not easy to get by in our times. So I am writing a self-help book for communists, and it's almost like I've written half of it already. It's just coming right out of me. It's like it's been in the works for years, and I've just been doing research here and there. I am writing a self-help book for communists. And it's going to be short. It will not be huge. It's not going to be, it's not going to be a big, huge book, but it'll be at least 100 pages. I'm about halfway done with the first draft of it. And I can't wait until it is available because it is so many things that need to be said. And, I hope that my detractors hate it. I hope that they hate it. I hope it makes them seethe and rage. I hope they rip it to shreds because that'll mean I'll be doing the right thing. There you go. I'm writing this self-help book for communists. I guess tonight was the night I was going to tell you I'm doing it, right? Because I started writing it as soon as I got back from Chicago. I started writing it. And it's just all coming out of me. I mean, if I wasn't on here streaming, I'd be writing it now. And it's like flowing out of me. I don't have to process it. It's like everything is it's already there in my mind, which is amazing, right? Which means that I'm coming from a good spot. I mean, it's gonna be good, folks. It's gonna be good. So there you go. So I guess I just wanted to share that with all of you. We've got some super chats to answer. So why don't we do the roll call? Let's do the roll call. And then I will start answering your super chat questions. And that'll be our show for tonight. So roll call, folks. Who's with us? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. I'll be putting you on the screen if I can. Names and locations. Who's with us tonight? Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you. Got Mark in Utica, New York. We got a dude in Pittsburgh. We've got Dan from India, Lexington, Kentucky, Ryan Overstreet, St. David's, Bermuda. We got Nat in Philadelphia. We got Florida, LC. We got Balthazar in Oakland. We got Ricardo in Joliet, Illinois. Ryan in Oakland. We got Mike in North Carolina. We got David in Washington State. We got Antonio. We love you, Antonio. Antonio was great at our last retreat, by the way. Awesome. He's in New Mexico. It's thanks to CPI. Well, we thank you too. Tyler. We got Tyler from Missouri. We got Stephen in Seattle. We got Belfast, Ireland. Heidi in Edinburgh. We got David in San Jose, California. We've got Bob Troy in New York. We got Tim in La Junta. We got Calgary, Alberta, Canada. Kareem. We got Garden of England. We got Heather and Riles in North Carolina. Wow, it's been a long time since I've been to North Carolina. Wow, it's been a long time. I spent a month in North Carolina building the protest against the Democratic National Convention. Honestly, didn't have the best time there, but the people there were awesome. Talking to people in coffee shops. I'll tell you, Heather, I went to Gay Pride in North Carolina Pride, and I sold 200 communist newspapers at Gay Pride. I was standing there on the side of Gay Pride. It was this Gay Pride festival in North Carolina, and I just stood there and I said, communist newspaper, get your latest issue. And I walked home with 200 $1 bills, right? That was an amazing experience. North Carolina. All right, we got, I used to be San Bruno. We got Jacksonville, Florida. We got Tyler from Wisconsin. We got Richard from Woodland County. We got San Diego County. We got Kieran from San Diego. We got Vicky from Greece. We got Tony, British Columbia, Canada. We got Jija in India. We got Olivia Joker. Very, very good. We got Richard in Woodland. We got Naples, Florida. We got Abel Malcolm from Wisconsin. We got Jenny from Cincinnati. We got Dalt L from South Carolina. We got Finn. Shout out to you, Finn. Finn was also at our event. Finn is awesome. Good to talk to you, Finn. We got Jenny Lynn from Cincinnati. She's great. We got Dario from Brooklyn. Shout out to you, Dario. Longtime friend of our community. So good to have you on here. Chester from England. Jared from Virginia. Buffalo, New York. We got Run for Office, Caleb Save America. Well, can't do that with the position I'm in now, but there you go. Buffalo, New York. Richard. We got Matt Farr from Maryland. We got James from DC. Mo and Danielle from Pomona, California. We got Jonathan C. in Los Angeles. Wow, we have got a great group of folks watching tonight. This is awesome. Los Angeles, California. Inessa. Thomas Smitherman in Southern Virginia. Chase Fillingham. Oh, Io from New York is with us. Io is awesome. Io is really awesome. So glad you're with us, Io. That's great. We got Nidin in Baltimore. We got Max, the Sax from Boston. Max is great too. Max gave an amazing class at our retreat. That video is going to be up soon. I've actually got the hard drive. We got to start getting it online. So there you go. Antonio is reminding us that there's 412 people watching. So hit the like button, subscribe, people. Absolutely. Carolyn Conway in Staten Island. Oh, wow. This is good stuff, folks. Shout out to you, Carolyn. I appreciate your help and all the great stuff you're doing. We got South Wales, UK, Morris McKinnon. We got Manhattan. Antonio from British Columbia is with us. Wow. Wow. We got Alexis in Rochester, New York. Shout out to you, Alexis. So glad to have you with us. All right. Very, very good. Very good. All right. I'm going to start answering super chat questions now. So if you have another super chat for me to add to the list, by all means, shoot me that super chat. Oh, we got someone watching from China. That's always good. I like China. Kendall in San Diego. So anyway, I'm going to start answering super chat questions. So the first super chat question we received tonight was how to defend the Soviet Union when haters say that they invaded countries, also specifically Czechoslovakia and Hungary. Well, you can just talk about the facts of both of those situations. There's just some pretty obvious facts regarding both of those situations. In 1956 in Hungary, you had an anti-communist government seize power. It was a government backed by the United States, and there were a number of fascists involved in the government, including Cardinal Mindszenty. Cardinal Mindszenty was a Nazi collaborating Catholic priest who was anti-Semitic and sympathetic with the fascists, and he was playing a role in the Hungarian government. And even though I think, what is his name? Nagy, he was the leader and he was claiming he was a socialist. They were anti-Soviet and they were being backed up by fascists, and the CIA was shipping in weapons, and the Hungarian events of 1956 were very clearly, very, very clearly being coordinated by the United States as a geopolitical move against the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union sent their forces to put it down. And there were a lot of people in Hungary who supported the Soviet Union. And that's what they never show you, right? That not everyone in Hungary was supporting the anti-communists, right? That's the narrative, right? You know, for keeping hope alive for U.S. communism in these increasingly tumultuous times. Thanks you for all that you and CPI do. Well, thank you, Heather. I appreciate that, Heather. And shout out to you out there in North Carolina. I hope you're going to join us in the CPI. We would love to have you as a member. But shout out to you. There you go. There are communists claiming that there is no anarchy of production in America, that America is already socialist. What do you think about that? All right. No anarchy of production. All righty. Okay. So there we go. So we're talking about Hungary, right? And, we're talking about Hungary, and, it was an anti-communist uprising, and the United States was involved. And I think actually Sebastian Gorka, who is a big figure in the Trump administration, he actually wears medals in honor of his relatives who killed communists during the 1956 events. I used to live in Cleveland, actually. And it's funny because Cleveland has the highest number of Hungarians of any city in the U.S., right? And there were loads of Hungarian bars. And if anyone thinks that the Hungarian uprising of 1956 was, and this is the standard narrative you get from Trotskyites and others, is that, it was they were the real communists. They wanted real workers' councils and real communism. That's what they wanted, and the Soviet Union crushed it to defend Stalinism. Well, I always said to anybody who believes that, go to a Hungarian bar in Cleveland. Go to the west side of Cleveland. Go to Parma or Parma Heights, and go to a Hungarian bar. And go and ask the old guys sitting there at the Hungarian bar. So you guys were the real communists, right? You guys were the true communists, weren't you? And see what they say. See what they say. And I think you'll know at that point what the character of the Hungarian revolt of 1956 was. It's pretty clear those folks were not communists. They were not fighting the Soviet Union because they were the true communists. They were not Trotskyites fighting for permanent revolution. They were not anarchists fighting for workers' councils from below. Those guys were some right-wing motherfuckers. That's what they were. In fact, the story that I heard, which is kind of hilarious, is during the 1950s. During the 1950s, there was there was, McCarthyism in the United States. And so communist groups had to kind of be underground. And in Cleveland, there were a number of members of the Communist Party, members of the Socialist Workers' Party that were operating, but they couldn't operate openly as who they were. And so they just did a lot of civil rights organizing. And they were boycotting Sears, Sears is a department store. It makes men's suits, etc. They were boycotting Sears, and they were having rallies to boycott Sears because Sears practiced segregation, right? And there was like a civil rights protest against Sears. So they were protesting Sears, and a group of Ku Klux Klansmen came to protest against their protest, right? To counter the protest, right? To say, that they supported Sears and their racial segregation. And these Klansmen, they're wearing hoods and they've got their signs, racial separation, keep the races separate, etc. And they're being racist. This is the 1950s. And they got closer to these Ku Klux Klansmen. They got a little bit closer, and they realized that some of them couldn't speak English. Some of them couldn't speak English. They were right-wing Hungarians. They were right-wing Hungarians who were protesting with the Ku Klux Klan. And they said, wow, that some of these Hungarians who came over right after the 1956 Hungarian events, that they were joining these racist Ku Klux Klan protests. And the funny thing was, these Klansmen had signs, immigrants, go back where you belong. We don't need you, America for Americans. And so there were these right-wing Hungarians who had just come off the boat from Hungary, and the right-wing groups they were hanging out with called them up and said, all right, we're going to a right-wing rally to protest some commies. And they were showing up, and they were holding signs that they couldn't even read. They didn't read the English, and they were holding signs, immigrants go back where you came from. And they were immigrants, and they were speaking Hungarian. They didn't speak a word of English. They were right-wing Hungarians. I heard that story from the older Workers' World Party members. It shows you how ridiculous all of this is. That, the Hungarians that were rallying around Cardinal Mindszenty, that were rallying around, in opposition to the Soviet Union. They were not. It was not that they were fighting for true communism. It was coming from a right-wing place. I missed two super chats. Let me write them down. So Yanis Varoufakis, and then I got to scroll up for the other one. Yanis Varoufakis. Right. All right. And there we go. And all right. And then the other one is, what do you think? Which are the ways that you think modern capitalism is eroding faith, culture, and tradition? What do you think? What do you think? I'm a Nazi here? Faith, culture, and tradition. But we can talk about that. Okay. Modern capitalism eroding faith, culture, and tradition. We'll talk about that. All right. So there we go. That was Hungary. Right? In Czechoslovakia, it was a very similar situation, right? In Czechoslovakia, you had the Prague Spring, and it was not as explicitly fascist as Hungary, right? It was more of these middle-class intellectual types, the privileged students that rallied around Dubček, who was the leader of Yugoslavia. But it was clearly being backed by the CIA, and they clearly did that propaganda where they portrayed the Soviet Union as tanks, as ruthless, cold, mechanical tanks. And one thing that I will say is that many people have pointed out that in some ways, the Soviet Union is not blameless in these situations because they let things get to that point, right? That there were probably things that the Soviet Union did in Hungary that contributed to the alienation and resentment of the Hungarian population that then allowed this CIA-backed fascist current to grow. And the same for Czechoslovakia. There were probably things the Soviet Union did in Czechoslovakia that caused resentment among the population, that caused this counter-revolutionary current to take hold. But one of the first things that Czechoslovakia did when Dubček took power is stop supporting the Vietnamese National Liberation Front. The so-called socialism with a human face that was being backed by the CIA. One of the first things they did was cut their support and end their support to the Vietnamese people. Well, at the time, 1968, the Vietnam War and the Vietnamese people and their struggle for national liberation was the most important revolutionary struggle around. And the fact that one of the first things they did was end their support for the Vietnamese people, that seems to indicate that, that 1968 revolt wasn't coming from a good place. And what's important to point out when people say the Soviet Union invaded countries too, is to point out that in both of those countries, in Hungary and in Czechoslovakia, there was a big section of the population that welcomed the Soviet Union because they wanted to defend socialism. But yes, there were a lot of people in Hungary that were rallying around Mindszenty. There may have been things the Soviet Union did in Hungary that caused resentment. But at the end of the day, there were a lot of people in Hungary who hated fascism, who thought the Soviet Union did a great job in defeating the Nazis. They were happy with all the schools and hospitals and infrastructure the Soviet Union was building and helping to build in Hungary. And they didn't like Nagy. They didn't like Mindszenty, right? And the same in Czechoslovakia. There were a lot of workers and farmers in Czechoslovakia who didn't like Dubček. Dubček was in with the wealthiest people, and that's what a lot of these people don't get. These color revolutions that tend to happen, they tend to be from the wealthiest and most privileged people in these socialist countries. It's the children of the party elite, the scientists, the engineers, the college professors, the intellectuals, and they often have grievances against the socialist system that are very legitimate, right? They feel stifled. They feel like their creativity is being held back, but they don't represent your average factory worker in Czechoslovakia. They don't represent your average farmer in Czechoslovakia. They represent themselves. And that's who the Prague Spring was. It was the rich kids. It was the children of the party bureaucracy and the party elite. And a lot of them just wanted open capitalism. A lot of them wanted to be able to, drive fancy American cars, and they wanted to be able to drink Coca-Cola, and the socialist system was holding that back. And they thought that if Czechoslovakia broke with the Soviet Union and adopted quote unquote democratic socialism and was aligned with the West and stopped supporting the Vietnamese, that then America would give them cars and TV sets and Coca-Cola, right? That's what they thought. And they were already privileged, and they said, look, we could be even more privileged, right? And your average worker, your average farmer in Czechoslovakia did not see it that way. And there are a lot of people in Czechoslovakia who supported the Soviet Union in intervening and removing Dubček, the hippie leader, the hippy dippy socialism with a human face guy who was backed by the CIA, we now know, right? And I mean, the history of CIA operations across Eastern Europe to move against socialism. I mean, look what happened. Look, if you want to know what was happening in Hungary in 1956, if you want to know what was happening in Czechoslovakia in 1968, you want to know what would have happened if the Soviet Union hadn't intervened, go to the 1990s. We talked about the fall of the Soviet Union in the 1990s. Look what happened. Sex trafficking, poverty, mass unemployment, economic demolition, right? It was a disaster. Read Naomi Klein's shock doctrine. Read Philip Thayer's Europe since 1989. When those people actually won, right? They lost in 1968, and that's why it's a big tragedy, because they lost. They lost in Hungary in 1956. That's why it's a big tragedy, because they lost. However, in 1989, they won. And they won in Czechoslovakia. They won in East Germany. They won. They even won in Russia in 1991. They won. And what did it bring? What did it bring to Eastern Europe? Endless freedom and fireworks going off and people going, yay, we're free. And the free market produced so much wealth and everyone was happy ever after. No, we saw what would have happened in Hungary in 1956. We saw that in Hungary in the 90s. And, if the Prague Spring, if they had won, we saw what would have happened in Czechoslovakia if they had won in 1968, in 1989 when they won, right? We saw it. So, it's pretty clear. The fall of the Soviet Union and what happened as a result of that, the economic consequences, millions of women sold into sex trafficking, massive unemployment, massive extreme poverty, huge rise in organized crime, huge rise in heroin addiction, the suicide rate through the roof, people starving on the streets and begging. That's what happened. So if you want to see why those people that were protesting in 1968 were wrong and why the Soviet Union was right to intervene, I think you have your evidence right there, right? The capitalists proved it for us, right? That's what was, tricky. Back in 1968, it was all up in the air. Well, they say they want democratic socialism. They say they want socialism with a human face, right? In 1956, it was all, the Trotskyites, everybody supported them. Now we know what those folks were fighting for because they actually won. And what they created was mass poverty and unemployment across Eastern Europe and economic demolition and neoliberalism. Look at the record economically of what happened when the free market was imposed on Eastern Europe, right? And keep in mind that that the governments that presided over the economic demolition of socialism across the former USSR and the former Eastern Bloc, those governments often had the exact same rhetoric, the very same rhetoric as the Prague Spring people, right? That keep in mind that in a lot of these countries, immediately after the overthrow of socialism, they elected new democratic socialist parties. And it was democratic socialists who presided over the economic demolition of the country. It's very interesting. You know, there's the Philip Thayer book. I recommend it, Europe Since 1989. It talks about how the Party of Democratic Socialism and many countries, the Communist Party, after it became compromised and controlled by the United States, and after it abolished and broke apart the socialist system, and after it aligned with the USA, it would change its name to being a Democratic Socialist Party. And at the same time that they were breaking apart socialism, they said, oh, we're just bringing in democratic socialism. So there you go. There you go. Long answer to an important question. Can you speak about how to explain fascism to people who may be new to leftism? Sure. Fascism is something that is really important to understand, but it's also important to, it's important to have nuance about it, because there are differences among communists and socialists about what fascism is. I mean, we all know fascism's bad. If you're a communist, you generally think fascism is bad. That's kind of a given. But what actually is it? Right? The last place you ever want to look to learn what fascism is the writings of fascists, because fascists say all kinds of different crazy shit, right? I mean, the Ku Klux Klan of the United States were arguably the first fascist organization in history. What they believed was completely different from a fascist organization that was formed a couple decades later in Russia called the Black Hundreds Party. What the Black Hundreds Party believed and what the Ku Klux Klan believed were completely different. They were completely different, but they were both fascism, right? What Mussolini believed in Italy was completely different than what Hitler believed in Germany. But that doesn't fucking matter, because they were both fascists, right? And that, Franco in Spain, right? Franco in Spain was a fascist, right? But what he believed, phalangism, was completely different than what Hitler believed, was completely different than what Mussolini believed, but they were both fascists. Fascism is not an ideology. Fascism is not about what you say. Fascism is about what you do. Fascism is defined by action, not by words. And that's what these people don't get. Fascism, I never want to hear anyone say fascism is an aesthetic. It's an aesthetic. Oh, shut up. It is definitely not an aesthetic. Fascism is not an aesthetic. And this idea that fascism is an aesthetic is totally wrong. All right. So let's talk about what communists generally think fascism is. There are three concepts of fascism that you generally get from communists. The first definition that you get is from your mainline communists, Communist Party USA, Democratic Socialists of America, Social Democrats, and mainline communists. Their understanding of fascism is generally it's the right wing. When the right wing get more authoritarian, when the right wing get more right wing and ultra right wing and authoritarian, that makes them fascists. And that's why the Communist Party USA has been telling people to vote for the Democrats since the Reagan years, right? Well, the right wing, they're creeping fascism, they're moving toward fascism, so we have to vote for the Democrats. That's been their argument. Well, we're moving toward fascism, so we have to vote for the Democrats. Well, fascism tends to be right wing. That's true. And, fascism tends to be authoritarian. That's true. But there's plenty of right wing and authoritarian governments that are not fascist. So that doesn't work. That's not that's not the essence of fascism. And then you have Trotsky's definition of fascism, the definition that he uses in his book, What is Fascism and How to Fight It, which is interesting. And again, it points to a lot of truth, but it misses the point, right? Trotsky says that fascism is a middle-class movement that is against the big capitalists, but also against the labor movement. It is a middle-class movement, and, it's an anti-labor radicalism. It's, they want to restore the past. They want to fight for the rights of small business owners, and they're against big business, and they're also against the labor movement. It's the middle class. It's a radical middle class movement that is anti-communist, but also against the big capitalists. And the Trotskyite argument goes that they exist and they're around, and then in a time of crisis, the capitalists take them and use them to stabilize capitalism and to set up a police state, right? That they use this middle-class movement They use it to stabilize capitalism. And there's an element of truth in that, right? The Ku Klux Klan was a very middle-class movement. They tended to, be very resentful of big corporations and big banks, while at the same time hating communists, hating black people, hating the labor movement, pushing racism. The Nazis were, they had a lot of anti-capitalist rhetoric, but they were very against communism. They were strike breakers, etc., very anti-Semitic, very racist. But so there's an element of truth in that. But there's plenty of middle-class movements that are anti-communist, that are also against big capitalists, that aren't fascist. So that's not the essence of it, right? That's an aspect of it, but it's not the essence. Then there's a very interesting definition, right? And this is the definition that you get from the Communist International, you get from some of the Maoist groups, you get in the third period, from 1928 to 1935, the Communists International put it out, the concept of, they talk about social fascism. And that argument is that fascism is, if they sound like communists, but they're not, then they're fascists. If they sound like communists, but they ain't, they're fascists. I'm kind of doing a caricature, but the idea is that as capitalism becomes less and less stable, the capitalists will try to stabilize it by setting up some kind of planned or mechanized economy. But it's not socialism. They don't change property relations, right? That it's an attempt to stabilize capitalism with the heavy hand of the state, but it's not socialism. There's an element of truth in that as well, right? Because that's what the Nazis did, and that's what Franco did in Spain, and that's what the Italian fascists did when they came to power. Is they tried to stabilize capitalism with the heavy hand of the state, but they did not change property relations. It did not become socialism. So there's an element of truth in that definition, but all three of those definitions are essentially wrong, right? And if you want a real scientific understanding of fascism, you need to go read the book Fascism and Social Revolution by R. Palm Dutt. R. Palm Dutt was a great British communist activist in the 1920s, 1930s, and he wrote this great book called Fascism and Social Revolution. And basically, the essence of fascism is this. Fascism is an attempt to stabilize capitalism by destroying things. It is an attempt to stabilize capitalism by degrowing, by driving down living standards, by setting up an authoritarian state, by using slave labor, by killing off sections of your population. It is an attempt to stabilize capitalism with degrowth. That's what fascism is. That is the essence of it. And that is what they did in Spain, and that's what they did in Italy, and that's what they did in France, in Germany under the Nazis. They are trying to stabilize capitalism by destruction. And it's generally done by one section of the ruling class. Most of the ruling class generally isn't for it. So one section of the ruling class tends to take control of the military, tends to take control of the government, and brutally suppress other sections of the ruling class. That's known as Bonapartism. So it's a Bonapartist movement because there's one faction of the ruling class battling against others. But once they take control, they use the state, the government, to try and stabilize capitalism by driving down living standards, degrowth. That is the essence of fascism. They are driving down living standards, and they are trying to solve the problems of capitalism by reducing the population, by setting up slave labor and driving down workers' conditions, by having slave labor. That's a big part of Nazi Germany was slave labor and the concentration camp system. They start, sterilizing people and driving down the birth rate. They start exterminating ethnic groups, and it's an attempt to stabilize capitalism with degrowth. And that's what fascism did in Italy. And that's what fascism did in Germany. That's what fascism did in Spain. It's an attempt to stabilize capitalism with degrowth. Fascism is an integration between big business and government to crush the lower classes. Well, that's an essence of it, Mr. Robert. But the problem with that is that there's always integration between big business and government to suppress the lower classes. Then every capitalist society would be fascist because there's always big business and government working together under capitalism. They run society all the time, and they're always crushing the lower classes and trying to drive down the wages, trying to maximize their profits. So that's true, what you're saying, Robert, but it's not the essence of fascism. So there you go. That's not the essence of it. But there you go. So yeah, that's the essence of fascism. The essence of fascism is trying to stabilize capitalism with degrowth, with destruction, by driving living standards down, by setting up an authoritarian state and trying to stabilize capitalism by driving down living standards, right? Louis Bonaparte was the dictator of France in 1851. He wasn't a fascist. He was a Bonapartist. He took control of the government in France. He suppressed his political opposition. But he wasn't a fascist? Why? Because he tried to stabilize capitalism with the opposite. He tried to build up the country, and he built railroads, and he built highways and high-speed railway, it wasn't high-speed railway. He built railroads. He built hospitals for poor people. He created a 12-hour work day to protect the rights of workers. He tried to stabilize capitalism by growing. Roosevelt, he was a Bonapartist. Roosevelt was an authoritarian figure, and he suppressed other sections of the ruling class. He tried to pack the Supreme Court, and Roosevelt, he mobilized workers in the streets to back him. He supported the sit-down strikes, but he wasn't a fascist. Why? Because he didn't stabilize capitalism with destruction. He stabilized capitalism by building. He built up infrastructure. He built up the country. He raised living standards. He did the opposite of what fascists do. All right, this reminds me of the Cultural Revolution. Well, no, the Cultural Revolution took place in the context of a socialist society. The Cultural Revolution was very bad. I don't like the Cultural Revolution. It was awful. And when China broke out of that, it was good. But it wasn't fascism because it took place in the context of a socialist society. Though you could argue that the degrowth, the idea that we could achieve full communism in poverty, and that it was okay for China to stay poor as long as they were staying true to their socialist principles. You could argue that has a fascist edge to it because it's degrowth, but that's not the essence of, it was still in a socialist society. So that's not it. All righty. Next question. I hope that was helpful, Carolyn. All right. The Winter War. All right. So the Winter War, the idea of the Winter War was that in 1939, the Soviet Union had already signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. Basically, the Soviet Union knew the Nazis were going to attack them, right? Hitler promised in Mein Kampf to rid the world of Bolshevism, to rid the world of communism. He actually begged the Pope. He wanted the Pope to call a new holy crusade against Bolshevism. And it was very clear that Hitler was against communism. So the Soviet Union, 1935, they mobilized their forces, the Communist International, to build a popular front against fascism. The Communist International mobilized to fight fascism. They fought fascism in 1936 at the Battle of Cable Street, and you had all these anti-fascist mobilizations happening across Europe. The communists were fighting fascism, building united fronts against fascism. And the Soviet Union wanted to have an alliance with the British against fascism. And the British said, no. United States, they wanted to have an alliance with the United States against fascism. And Roosevelt was interested, but then the U.S. Congress passed the Neutrality Act, and they couldn't have it. And France briefly had an alliance with the Soviet Union under the Popular Front government, but then the French backed out of it, and they were against it. And Spain, the Spanish Republic was facing a fascist civil war, right? The fascists were trying to overthrow the Spanish Republic. General Franco was waging a war against the Spanish Republic. And so the Soviet Union sent its weapons and its military to aid the Spanish people. Mexico aided the Spanish people, but that was it. Only 2 countries in the world aided Spain. And the Nazis provided air support and bombing, and military support to the Spanish Republic, to the Spanish fascists to attack the Republic, right? And Guernica and the horrendous bombings that went on. And so the Soviet Union was trying to help the Spanish Republic defeat fascism, and they failed. In 1939, they failed. So as that happened, the Soviet Union really felt they had no choice. So they signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. And that was an agreement with the Nazis, a non-aggression pact that you don't cross this line and we don't cross this line. They drew a line down Europe, and they said, you don't cross this line and we don't cross this line. And the idea was it would buy time because they knew eventually the Nazis were going to invade the Soviet Union. It was only a matter of time. But they figured by drawing this line and telling the Nazis, you're not allowed to cross this line, they could prepare for the invasion. And so that's what they did. They started preparing for the invasion. Now, Finland was on one side of that line. They were on the Soviet side of the line. And the Finnish government had a lot of pro-Nazi elements in it. There were a lot of people in Finland who were sympathetic to the Nazis and hated the communists. And the Soviet Union needed to prepare for the Nazi invasion by moving their army into Finland to protect from the pending Nazi invasion. This is why these people that say it was an alliance are just full of shit. Why would the Soviet Union have moved its forces into Finland if not to prepare for the inevitable fascist invasion? Anyway, so they offered the government of Finland. They said, all right, we need these strategic areas to get ready for the Nazi invasion. We need to move our army there. So we will actually trade with you. We will give you the exact same amount of our territory in exchange for it. They offered to give them in exchange. And they said, we don't want all of Finland. We just want this strategic area so we can get ready for the fucking Nazi invasion. It's a pretty logical thing. If the evil Nazis are going to invade you and you're getting ready for the Nazi invasion, and there's this brink of territory, and there's a line the Nazis have so far agreed not to cross, but everyone knows they're eventually going to cross it, right? And, and Finland supposedly was against the Nazis too, but there's a lot of pro-Nazi people in the Finnish government. So the Russians and the Soviet Union said, look, we will, if you let us put our military in this area, we'll actually expand Finland's territory. We'll give you way more territory, and that'll be our deal. And Finland said, no. Nope, not going to do it. Nope, not going to do it. The Soviet Union said, okay, you do realize time is running out and the Nazis are going to invade us and we really need this strategic area. And the Finnish government said, nope. And then the Soviet Union discovered that in the Finnish government, there were a number of Nazi agents. There were a number of people in the Finnish government that were directly tied in with Hitler's intelligence agencies. And so they started giving the Finnish government information about, hey, just so you know, these Nazis that we're all getting ready for an invasion of, they've got a bunch of operatives inside of your government. And here's the information. And the KGB was giving them information about all these people in the government that were Nazis and that were using the Finnish society to help set up for the invasion of Finland by the Nazis, etc. And, they didn't care, and the Finnish government wasn't interested in doing anything about it. So the Soviet Union said, okay, fine. We're going to have to prepare for the Nazi invasion. So we're going to move our forces. We are going to move our forces into Finland. And they did. And it was called the Winter War. Fidel Castro said it wasn't the right move to do. I mean, it made sense to me, again, World War II was just such a horrendous, awful war that there's a lot of things in the context of World War II that make sense that are really not good things, right? And when you're up against, you have to remember that 26 million people, 26 million people in the Soviet Union died in World War II. 26 million. Not a small number. And so the Soviets were up against such a deadly, murderous foe. And they were just doing everything they could. They started moving the population around on the basis of nationality. They were doing all kinds of things that Finland helped Germany circumvent the no submarine provision in the Treaty of Versailles by developing German Type 2 submarines. Well, there you go, Peter. That's another aspect that's worth pointing out. Thank you for that, Peter. That needs to be said. And that, again, war is a mess. War is not pretty. But in the lead up to World War II, the Soviets clearly knew the Nazis were their enemy. The idea that they were the allies of the Nazis is so ridiculous. And they knew the Nazis were their enemy. They knew they were under attack. And they operated accordingly. And the Winter War in Finland was part of that operating. All right. Is it true that most of the world is capitalist and the most of the world is poor? Yes, it is, right? Yeah. Again, it's never capitalism's fault. Africa. Look at Africa. A continent that's been under the gun and domination of Western imperialism and colonialism for well over 100 years, 200 years, right? Nigeria is now the top oil exporting country on the African continent. And the people there live in utter poverty. The life expectancy is very low. Literacy rate is very low. ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron make out like bandits, but the country is underdeveloped. It doesn't have modern infrastructure. It doesn't have running water and electricity. The people of Nigeria are poor, but Nigeria provides the oil companies with more oil than any other African country. Great example, right? Nigeria is poor and Nigeria is capitalist. Guatemala, great example. Guatemala is a country in Central America. 1953, they had a socialist president, but the USA and the CIA removed him. In the coup, they removed Jacobo Arbenz. They put the military in power. 1980s, they had a brutal military dictator named Rios Montt who committed genocide against the indigenous people and was a brutal right-winger planted and armed and aligned with the United States. And he was awful. And they got free markets in Guatemala. And Guatemala is a deeply poor country. There's many examples of this. Many countries, Colombia, you can go to, many countries around the world that are capitalist and poor. And that never gets pointed out, right? It's always communism makes countries poor. Well, no, communism turned Russia and China into superpowers. Communism gave Cuba a higher life expectancy than most countries on the African continent, or than most countries in South America. Haiti, that's another great example. Thank you, B. Vargas. Haiti is capitalist, free market country, Haiti, where people are still using charcoal and burning charcoal in order to eat, in which the life expectancy is low. People are rioting in the streets because of gasoline prices. Cuba is way better off than Haiti, but no one ever talks about that, right? There are many, many examples of countries around the world that are both poor and capitalist. Meanwhile, communism has raised many countries up and made them superpowers. So there you go. All right. Ultras who say we produce too much food. Well, they're wrong. I mean, we're having global food shortages. There's a shortage of grain because Ukraine is not producing like they once would. There's a shortage of grain also because Russia is unable to export. I mean, there's a drought. We're having crop shortages in the United States. I mean, what is it with these people? I mean, the whole world, the UN, and all of them are talking about global food shortages. But no. They just are so committed to this idea there are just too many people in the world, this Malthusian stuff that just can't be so. Well, I had somebody jump on and just start saying, well, the problem isn't that they're trying to reduce crop outputs. The problem is meat. We just need to get rid of meat. Well, look, if you want to do the vegan thing, that's fine. But this is a real political situation. This isn't an opportunity for you to tell me how bad meat is, okay? We're in the middle of a crisis, and food is not being produced as adequately as it should, and Sri Lanka is in a crisis because of that. And at a moment when food output is lower than it should be, right? And there's going to be food shortages. Food is not going to be delivered in a lot of key areas. At a moment that that's happening, and yes, global warming is definitely a factor. Climate change, droughts, you got it. I don't deny global warming. Global warming is a fact. But at a moment that we're having a big problem, with food and food shortages, etc., we've got all these leftists who declare that there's no problem and degrowth is good, and if you say Malthusian, that means you're anti-Semitic or something. These people are idiots. They're not worth our time. Next question: what is vulgar nationalism? First of all, well, nationalism is a belief in one's nation, right? If you believe that your nation is what you're fighting for, right? If you're a French nationalist, you're fighting for the French. You're fighting for France. You're fighting for all things French. You're an English nationalist. You're fighting for all things English. You're a Scottish nationalist. You're fighting for all things Scottish, right? Nationalism is a political ideology about being devoted to one's nation, right? A nation is not the same as country. A nation has its own language, its own culture, etc., right? And the USA is not a nation. The USA is a country, but we're not a nation. We're not the same nation. But regardless, I would say vulgar nationalism or is a synonym with national chauvinism, in which you're not only are you a nationalist fighting for your nation, but you go as far as saying my nation is superior to other nations. My nation should oppress other nations. My nation is better, better than other nations. My nation is superior to other nations. Screw other nations. I don't know enough about him. I just don't know enough about him. Screw other nations. Who cares about other nations? My nation is the only thing that matters. My nation is better than all other nations. All other nations are inferior to my nation. That's vulgar nationalism. So there you go. Or national chauvinism is what I would call it. All right. People who say America is already socialist, no anarchy of production. Well, I know Haas says that, and I don't agree with that. And I'm sure he has his reasons for thinking that, and he can think that, and I'm not going to get into great depth about why I disagree because look, stop it. Okay, I get it, right? I get it. This is your entertainment. Whoever sent that chat in, this is your entertainment, right? I'm just this disembodied voice talking on the internet. I'm just a TV character to you, but Center for Political Innovation, we're under attack. You know what I mean? People are threatening us. People are hostile to us, right? There are people going out of their way to smear us. And we have friends, people that are willing to stand with us against different, amid this turmoil, right? We got the People's Party that's friendly to us. We've got Party of Communists that is friendly to us and sends people to our conferences. Haas has been friendly to us, and I don't agree with everything Haas says, and he knows that. But stop trying to make me and Haas fight, right? I know what's supposed to happen is I'm supposed to go into a big rant about why he's wrong about this, right? Which I could do, but I'm not going to. And then you would clip that rant and then you'd send it to Haas and then you'd go, did you see what Caleb just said about you? And then you'd go, fight, 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 fight. Stop it. All right. I get that would be very entertaining. I know that would be a great show, but I like Haas and Haas likes me and we don't agree on this point. Right. And we don't agree on this point and that's fine. Right. But stop trying to incite discord for entertainment purposes, because I'm trying to build a united front against the imperialists, right? Haas is my friend, and I like him, and I like the fact that he is an anti-imperialist and that he's challenging the bread tube folks. And there are a lot of the formulations he says on his show that I don't agree with, and he knows that, and that's fine. He's an anti-imperialist on the issues that matter, like opposing imperialism, standing with the people of the eastern regions and Donetsk and Lugansk, and standing with China. He's right on point, challenging the bread tubers and their stupid synthetic leftism and their cultural liberalism that's pro-imperialist. I'm with him on that, and that's what matters. The Haas community and our community, there's some overlap, and people are allowed to be in both. But, I don't agree with him on everything, and that's okay. All right. Confessions of an Economic Hitman is a great book. Very, very good book. That is definitely capitalism, though. That's imperialism by Lenin. Capitalism in its monopoly stage. We upend developing countries, then financially, militarily control them. That's imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Go read Lynn's book on that. That's exactly what it is. There you go. All righty. Yanis Varoufakis, he's progressive international. He calls himself a Marxist, but he's with Bernie Sanders. He's with Jeffrey Sachs. They're the progressive international, they're called. And they're social democrats, more or less. Very anti-Russia, very anti-oil, very anti-fossil fuels, very much in favor of reducing the population and living standards because of climate change. That's who they are. And Yanis Varoufakis, again, he thinks that capitalism would be more stable if we had things like healthcare and jobs and education. He's probably right. That doesn't mean we shouldn't fight for those things, but ultimately he doesn't advocate a full-on socialist economy. He's like Bernie Sanders. He just kind of wants more of a welfare state. We want more of a welfare state too, but we want that, as a transition to building a movement to eventually overthrow this system. And move toward a government of action that fights for working families, move toward a breaking this country out of imperialism, building a socialist society. That's what we're advocating, so there you go. So there you go. So it's a little bit different. So there you go. He's a social democrat. He's taking some pretty anti-Russian positions, but on some other things, Latin America, he tends to be better, etc. All right. How is modern capitalism eroding faith, culture, and tradition? Well, tell you what, I will read to you from the Communist Manifesto. I think that will answer that question. All right. Here we go. The bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value. And in place of the numberless, indefensible, chartered freedoms, it has set up one single unconscionable freedom: free trade. In one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, it has substituted naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked upon with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, the lawyer, the priest, the poet, the man of science into paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and reduced the family to a mere money relation. The bourgeoisie has disclosed how it came to pass that the brutal display of vigor in the Middle Ages, which reactionaries so much admire, found its fitting complement in the most slothful indolence. It has been the first to show what man's activity can bring about. It has accomplished wonders far surpassing Egyptian pyramids, Roman aqueducts, and Gothic cathedrals. It has conducted expeditions that put in the shade all former exoduses of nations and crusades. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, with them as the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence of all earlier industrial classes. Constantly revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguish the bourgeois epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast, frozen relations with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions are swept away. All new formed ones become antiquated before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, and all that is holy is profaned. And man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life and his relations with his kind. Now, if that is not Karl Marx explaining in great detail why any conservative should hate the bourgeoisie and hate capitalism, I don't know what is. It's a very poetic passage from the Communist Manifesto where Karl Marx sounds either like he's praising the bourgeoisie or like he's a conservative, because he's showing that all the conservative things, like traditional family structures, like chivalry, patriotism, honor, moral codes, religious fervor, all of them are getting ripped apart by capitalism. And that's Karl Marx. That is Karl Marx, showing that under capitalism, nothing is sacred, nothing is permanent, things are always changing, callous cash payment rules. That is one of Karl Marx's best passages from the manifesto. That is Karl Marx explaining a conservative critique of capitalism. And the last super chat that I have, was the Cultural Revolution ultra-leftist? Yes, it was. I would argue that it was, because it argued that China did not need to become wealthier, that it could just enforce a rigid political line, and that by doing so, it could move ahead toward communism. And that it argued that it didn't matter if China stayed poor, just so long as they enforced their pure political line. And they forced their pure political line in very brutal, horrendous ways that made life in the country very unlivable. You talk to anyone who lived during the Cultural Revolution in China, even people who think it was necessary, which I've met a few people who think it was necessary, they all say it was a nightmare. It was an utter nightmare, because in order to purify the political line, they were destroying everything that was old, waging war against Confucius, waging war against, traditional music, waging war against women wearing makeup, and waging war against, anything, right? That they were constantly whipping up this state of desire to purify everything, make it in line with pure communism. And the rules kept changing. There was no clear written rules of what you were allowed to do and what you weren't allowed to do. It was every day they would just decide that something needed to change, that, and they would mobilize these mobs of young people that would go out and brutally enforce it on people. And it was pretty vicious. And the Cultural Revolution was an attempt to make China just purely communist, to, force to make sure that nothing that was not in line with the communist perspective was allowed. And it did a lot of damage, and a lot of people got hurt. And the thing is, that's not how it works. You cannot will communism. You cannot get to the higher stage of communism by white knuckling it, by just going, "Argh!" That's not how it works. And Che Guevara didn't understand this. Che Guevara didn't understand this. Ho Chi Minh didn't understand this. No, I think Ho Chi Minh understood this, but Che Guevara didn't understand this. Stalin made errors in this way. And this was the tragedy of the Cold War. It was the tragedy of the Cold War was that because these countries were surrounded, because they were building socialism in poverty, they tried to create communism by pure force of will. All right. They argued that if we just are pure enough in our principles, if we just redistributed everything in an egalitarian way, if we just are forcing everyone to follow big moral codes, then we can have communism. That's not how it works. You cannot have communism in poverty. I would encourage you to go and read Critique of the Goethe Program. Again, we're going to pull up Marx here. Critique of the Goethe Program. Critique of the Goethe Program by Karl Marx, he very clearly spells out that in order to have communism, you must have vast material abundance, that communism and the class relations of society under communism are not based on everyone just being forced to be good. They're based on the amount of abundance in society increasing, right? And we can talk about that. Let me just pull up the quote. All righty. I'm just trying to get to the part that is in reference to this. Right? Here we go. It says, these defects are inevitable in the first phase of communist society, as it is when you have just emerged from the prolonged birth pangs of capitalist society. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby. That's a very important phrase. Right can never be higher than the economic structure of society and its cultural development conditioned thereby, meaning that you can't force a new economic system onto the world. You can't just say to the world, we will it. We will make society more classless and stateless. You can't just do that. Right can never be higher. Right can never be higher than the conditions thereby. And then he says, in the higher phase of communist society, after the enslaving subordination of the individual to the division of labor, and therewith the antithesis between mental and physical labor has vanished, after labor has become not only a means of life, but life's prime want, after the productive forces have increased with the all-around development of the individual, and all the springs of cooperative wealth flow more abundantly, only then can the narrow horizon of bourgeois right be crossed in its entirety, and society inscribe on its banners, from each according to his own ability, to each according to his needs. So you can only achieve the higher stage of communism when you have created so much of an abundance that there is no division between different jobs, no division between mental and physical labor. When there's so much wealth that labor becomes life's prime want, meaning people work because they feel like it, not because they have to, right? The higher stage of communism is based on vast material abundance. Right can never be higher than the conditions of society. So the reason that we have class society is because of scarcity. Social hierarchies are rooted in the fact that society is at a certain stage of development, right? And that is the problem. And the Gang of Four, and we'll talk about the Gang of Four. Gleb has got his super chat here on the screen, then I'm going to answer about that. The Gang of Four had the notion that you could somehow achieve full communism in China by willing it. China could, not have economic development, could not reach a higher stage of abundance, and it would still have full communism. Well, you can't, right? There's going to be inequality in a socialist society. There's going to be problems. The reason that socialism is better than capitalism is because growth is no longer restrained. If you read what Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels wrote about, under capitalism, the more efficient technology becomes, the poorer people get, right? That you have poverty amid plenty. Poverty and abundance walk hand in hand. People are hungry because there's too much food. People are homeless because there's too many houses. The anarchy of production. You have all kinds of workers who are not working because of the fact that the capitalists can't make money from their labor. You have all kinds of inefficiency from the fact that your system is organized to make profits. It's the anarchy of production. So socialism comes along, and the banks, factories, and industries are organized by the people. And they're rationally planned, production upon a predetermined plan. And because of that, you no longer have this problem of poverty amid plenty. Growth can continue uninterrupted, because you don't have the problem of overproduction. You don't have the tendency of the falling rate of profit. And you're strategically planning out what you need for the country. And because of that, growth can suddenly continue. And countries that are very poor, like Russia, can become industrial superpowers. And countries that are very poor, like China, can become the second largest economy in the world. And Cuba can build a tremendous healthcare system and have an infant mortality rate that's lower than the United States. And you can raise people up out of poverty, and you can build, because the anarchy of production, the chaos of the market, the irrationality of a bunch of wealthy capitalists trying to make profits is eliminated. That's what socialism can achieve. But there's going to be inequality in such a society, and there's going to be problems from the hangovers of capitalism. But as you start to raise people up out of poverty, right? As you start to raise people up out of poverty, those social relations can fade, and you can move toward eventually creating a stateless, classless society, right? And that is Marxism. Now, the Gang of Four in China, what would China be like today if they had taken power? Easy. It would be capitalist. It would look kind of like Bangladesh. It would look kind of like parts of Africa. It would be deeply, deeply impoverished, right? It would be deeply, deeply impoverished. Deeply impoverished. Why? Because the Communist Party would have been overthrown. All the engineers and scientists and technicians, all the people that were the basis of the counter-revolutions that happened in Eastern Europe, were feeling miserable. That's why they all went out and rioted after Zhou Enlai's death. The funeral of Zhou Enlai became a counter-revolutionary riot. You can read about the Tiananmen incident of 1976. It became a counter-revolutionary riot because the forcing of pure communist relations onto society, which is what the Gang of Four was doing. They were trying to use the Red Guards and this authoritarian mobilization of the population to force society to be super egalitarian. It wasn't working. It was not working. And it was making intellectuals and scientists and creative people and engineers and college professors miserable. They lived in terror. You can read about the famous white snail incident that I've talked about, where a group of students went to the United States, and they met with a company that made color televisions. And they realized that there were sanctions, and that American companies and British companies didn't sell color televisions to any communist countries. But China could sell color televisions to communist countries. And so they said, well, why don't we use this loophole? We'll get the technology from the American company. We'll have China set up a factory to make color televisions, and China can make color televisions and sell them to the Soviet Union and Romania and Czechoslovakia, and that'll be a great way to make money. A lot of people in China said that's a great idea. And so the TV company gave these students a glass snail as like a token. And they came back and they said, hey, why don't we have the Chinese government build a color TV factory? And then we can be the ones to export color TVs all over the countries that can't buy them from the United States, and it'll be perfect. And everyone thought that was a great idea, except for Mao's wife, Jiang Qing, who was one of the Gang of Four. And she said, oh, no, we don't want any bourgeois decadent TVs. We would never want color TVs in China. Color TVs are against communism. And this snail is a code. It's a coded insult to China. They think that China is a slow-moving country, that we move at a snail's pace. And she just waged this cancel culture hate campaign against these students and tried to destroy their lives, because they had dared suggest that China, a country that was deeply poor, could make money by selling TV sets to other countries. That's nuts, right? And the Gang of Four, anyone who came forward and had an idea about how to make China a wealthier country, make China more prosperous, was being beaten down and suppressed. The Gang of Four were wreckers. They were wreckers. They're people that don't know how to build. They just know how to tear things down. You look at Jiang Qing, you look at the various three other people, I'm going to mispronounce all their names. And I mispronounced her name too because I don't speak Chinese, but all they knew how to do was attack people and terrorize people and stop people and suppress people. And trust me, I have been in communist groups and I have dealt with wreckers. Wreckers are awful people, awful people. They are just really awful people because all they know how to do is attack, right? It's kind of like, imagine a bar. At a bar, you have a bouncer, right? And this bouncer, his job is to make sure that there's no one there who's going to fight. If there's somebody who's fighting, he kicks them out. But he's been there for a few months. And he realizes that no one in the bar is fighting anybody. And he might be out of a job pretty soon. So many people have seen situations at bars where bouncers start trying to pick fights with people. Why? Because that's what they do. If there's no fights, then there's no need for a bouncer, right? That's a wrecker. That's a wrecker. And that's what the Gang of Four were. They were going around suppressing people, going around accusing people of being counter-revolutionary, going around terrorizing people, because that's what they did. They were wreckers. They were just wreckers, right? And that there had been this struggle between Mao and Liu Shaoqi. And so, there was the Cultural Revolution began that way. But then after that, you just got a group of people who knew how to terrorize people. They were always accusing people of plotting against Mao, accusing people of not having a communist line. They went after the students for coming up with the idea about TVs and the glass snail incident. They're wreckers, right? There's an individual that was in the Workers' World Party who was just like this, that they were a person, right? Sam Marcy was the founder of Workers' World Party, was a brilliant man. And then there was this guy who I will not say his name out of respect for him, which is more than he deserves, right? And he was a former boxer, right? Former boxer. He's really tall, and he has a normal voice, but then when he's trying to be political, he speaks like this, like it's more working class, like he's from the Bronx. It's an awful person, and he's a wrecker. That's all he is. He's a wrecker, right? And that Sam Marcy used him to break up factions in the Workers' World Party, and then he spent his entire adult life basically finding people to be Sam Marcy's enemies, convincing Sam Marcy people were plotting against him. Also, he could be the great, it's a wrecking behavior, right? And wreckers, you can't have wreckers running the country. And that's what the Gang of Four were doing. And the intellectuals and the middle class people, they were terrorized. And it was people would be killed. People would, and these wreckers were holding back China's economic development. And, and as a result of it, of this happening, as a result of this happening, China couldn't grow. And when they were overthrown, when Deng Xiaoping overthrew the Gang of Four, people celebrated. All right, I got a couple other super chats to go over. It's human nature to control others, unfortunately. All systems get... No, it's not, Robert. Social hierarchies are rooted in scarcity. Let me repeat that. Social hierarchies are rooted in scarcity. It is scarcity that necessitates social hierarchies. It necessitates authoritarianism. It necessitates the state. It is when you have enough to go around, when everyone's going to have enough, and there's no question that they're going to have enough, then there doesn't need to be a need to regulate who has what. The social hierarchies are not human nature. They are rooted in scarcity. Look, human beings, it's in our DNA to run. But do we run all the time? No, we run when we have to. We run when we feel like it, but we don't have to run all the time. Yes, it is in our DNA to create hierarchies, but you'll notice that throughout human history, the hierarchies have changed. Under pre-class society, the majority of human history, what they call primitive communism, under the primitive communism, there was very little social hierarchy. Everyone in the tribe was pretty much equal. Might have been very authoritarian, but there wasn't anyone exploiting anybody else. Then we got the rise of slavery and feudalism and now capitalism. The nature of the hierarchies changed based on material conditions. And when you eliminate scarcity, when we have total freedom from want, at that point, social hierarchies tend to fade away. Social hierarchies are something humans build out of necessity. And who knows, maybe people will voluntarily set up social hierarchies because they feel like it, right? Isn't that what BDSM is, right? The S&M practices, people like draw up contracts and dominatrixes and doms and subs, but that's voluntary. It's not the same thing. They're doing it because they find it fun or they find it sexy, right? That's social hierarchies being recreated for fun, but they're not dangerous, right? At that point, they're built because people find them entertaining. But actual existing social hierarchies, laws, prisons, courts, death penalty, torture chambers, social authoritarian hierarchies that exist in the real world that are not consensual, that are not voluntary, are created out of necessity because we live in a society where there is not abundance. All right. Do you claim to be the font of truth, or do you encourage people to do research? Yes, I encourage people to do research. Come on. Yeah, no, I know all. I have all the information in the world, and anyone who disagrees with me is going against God's will. Give me a break. These people that go out of their way to just lie about me. Of course I encourage. Do you see this bookshelf behind me? Do you know how many people, I've encouraged to read stuff? Of course I'm encouraging people to read. I know you're on my side, Polonius Punk, but you're answering the latest smears on me. If I'm not this, I'm that. If I'm not this, I'm that. I mean, it's just, yeah, there you go. All right. There you go. There you go. Only destiny knows everything, says Bobbis. Exactly. Only destiny truly knows everything. But anyway, no, Felonious Punk is on my side, but he's answering some of the questions of people that are not. So let's do Gleb's question, because Gleb sent a super chat in and I missed that. So I'm going to go over Gleb's and then we'll go down to the next one. And then hopefully we'll be over soon. I mean, I guess if they just keep rolling in, I'll keep going, right? Why not, right? So if you were to bet on a country having a communist revolution in the next 30 years, what would it be? Well, Gleb, I am going to answer your question by saying the United States of America. Yeah. And by communist revolution, I would prefer it be a peaceful transition. I would prefer that socialists get elected. I would prefer that a coalition of anti-imperialists take power and transition the country democratically to socialism. I would bet on the United States. 30 years might be longer than that, but I think in the next 30 years, we're heading toward a revolutionary period. We're not in a revolutionary period yet, but we're heading there. I would say the United States. And you said, if I could bet, I've already bet on it. I've bet my life on that. I mean, look, if we don't have socialism in the next 30 years, the society that will exist here will be one in which I'm dead. So, you ask me if you're going to bet on a country having a communist revolution. It's not a matter of me betting money, going to the gambling table and, saying, I'll put $30 on socialism coming to America. No, it's not that. It's not that, Gleb. I've bet my life on it. I've gone all in on this. I'm building the Center for Political Innovation. My Twitter has been tagged as Russian state-affiliated media. I've been subjected to a lot of threats. I'm standing with the anti-imperialist camp amid a moment where that's not the popular thing to do. I'm building an organization and a community of people, and I'm basically betting my life on it. So yeah, if I could bet, I have bet. I bet my life on having socialism come to the United States in the next 30 years, maybe the next 50 years. And if it doesn't, if we don't have socialism in the next 30 years, the society that we will have will be one in which I will probably not be alive. I might be in prison. I might be in exile. But if we don't have socialism in the next 30 years, if we don't have socialism in the next 50 years, we don't have socialism in the next 60 years, you're probably not going to have Caleb Maupin. So there you go. There you go, Gleb. I bet that wasn't the answer you were expecting. All right. Very good. Now we got some other questions to answer. Why would Western liberals lionize Hu Jintao but hate Xi Jinping? Because of the fact that that Xi Jinping moved China in a direction of being more fully in line with its socialist principles. It's pretty clear that there was a section of the party in China that felt like socialism was just kind of on paper, that felt like socialism just means a good economy in the country or something like that. And there's also a section of the Chinese Communist Party that is full-on hardliner neo-Maoist. Xi Jinping came in as kind of the centrist position. And when Xi Jinping came in, it was very clear that China was saying, we're a socialist country. We believe in communism here. No, it's not just for show. No, we don't eventually want to transition to the Western system. No, when Xi Jinping came in with his mass line campaign and his crackdown on corruption, when they started publishing The Governance of China, Volume 1, Volume 2, Volume 3, Volume 4, when he started talking about Mao Zedong thought, when he commissioned that amazing anime about the life of Karl Marx, when they started, reviving red culture, it became very, 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 very clear that China was sticking with socialism, and they were going to be moving in a more ideologically consistent direction, that the elements in the party that wanted to restore capitalism had lost out, that Xi Jinping was bringing China into, more of a hardline socialist stance. Xi Jinping apparently speaks highly of Stalin. And he very much is pushing Marxism-Leninism. They're teaching Marxism-Leninism. The schools in China are being straightened out now, so they teach communist ideology. A lot of these schools, they were teaching like regular kind of, almost watered down. They weren't even teaching communism. It was just kind of vague patriotism. But now Xi Jinping is coming in there and he's saying, we're communists. The U.S. imperialists are out to get us. We ain't going to tolerate it. And we are a communist country. Mao Zedong thought must be central in all things. And that's why they hate him. That is absolutely why they hate him. And that's why liberals are sad to see Hu Jintao go, because Hu Jintao represented a situation where there might be hope for counter-revolution in China. There might be hope for communism kind of just gradually fading away. And Xi Jinping drew a line in the sand, said that's not going to happen. We believe in socialism. We believe in socialism with Chinese characteristics. We believe in Mao Zedong thought. We believe in Marxism, Leninism. And that's what's going to happen. So there you go. That was pretty cool. That was pretty cool. That's why I like Xi Jinping so much. All right, folks. I'm going to end the stream here, but this is the way we always end it. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. That's just a lie, Robert. The people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. We're going to do it one more time. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. While the danger of a new world war still exists, and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Thanks, folks. Good night.